Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. I never paid much attention to those hex stories that country folks love to tell. Actually, I always found it funny to see how people believe any strange thing is the work of voodoo or witchcraft. When I moved here, to this little forgotten town in rural Texas, I figured I'd hear a lot of tall tales, and I did. I just didn't expect to become the target of one myself. I'm not saying I believe in this stuff, okay? I'm just telling you what happened because honestly, to this day I try to find an explanation, and look, it's not easy. I was always the type of person who laughed at these things. Voodoo dolls, hexes, evil eye to me. It was all excuses to explain bad luck or just plain stupidity. You know that talk about don't mess with that, it brings bad things. I was the first to say it was nonsense, that fear only attracts more bad stuff, that if you ignore it, it goes away. And for a long time, that worked for me. The problem is that when you're in the middle of nowhere, in a town where even the radio fails, stories carry a different weight. People tell things in a way that, I don't know, seems to come from a deeper place. It's not just to scare, it's like a warning, you know. But even so, I kept thinking it was all exaggeration. Until the day I found that weird doll thrown on the ground of the property I just rented. At first, I laughed. It looked more like a bad joke, you know. Like kid stuff. But today, thinking back, I should have left it there. I had just moved there because I got a good work contract, maybe 6 months. And since it was cheaper to stay in a house in the countryside than pay rent in the city, I didn't think twice. The house was simple, old, but it was solid. And the land was big, full of tall grass and some fences falling apart. Nothing I couldn't fix with time. The day I found the doll, I was cleaning the back pasture. I found it in the middle of the grass, all dirty with soil. It was made of raw leather, like that cowhide people used to make drums, you know. And the weirdest part was that it had a dried tongue sewn across the chest, like holding the body together. It was a cow's tongue. I recognized it right away. The smell was bad, kind of sour, but nothing absurd. At the time, I thought it might be some folk art, maybe something from an old party, like those things country people like to make up. I picked up the doll with a stick and took it to the yard trash, kind of laughing to myself about the whole thing. But now, remembering, when I threw it away, I had a strange feeling like I was doing something wrong. I can't explain it, but I felt a different energy. That night, I was too tired to think about anything. I took a shower, ate some leftover food I'd brought from town, and crashed on the bed without even changing the bedroom light bulb that had been flickering for days. But that's when the strange stuff started. It was early morning when I woke up to a noise. At first, I thought it was just wind or some animal from the woods, because every now and then possum or armadillo would show up. But it wasn't exactly a normal noise. It was a muffled sound, kind of rhythmic, that seemed to come from inside the house. And I swear by everything, it was just like cattle lowing, but lower, like someone was trying to imitate it and couldn't quite get it right. I stayed in bed for a long time, just listening. I thought it could be something in my head, tiredness, I don't know. But when I finally got the courage to get up and turn on the light, My clothes that I'd left thrown on the chair were torn, like something had run claws or nails through them. And it wasn't a knife cut, no. It was an irregular tear, pulled, kind of frayed, the way only an animal would do. I wanted to believe it was just a rat or a wildcat, anything like that. But there was no hole, no open window, nothing to explain it. And I know it sounds silly, but that feeling of weight in the air that I'd felt earlier was there again. Only this time stronger, like the whole house was. I don't know, breathing with me. The next night I tried to act like nothing had happened. Seriously, I kept telling myself it was just an animal, that the tear in the clothes could have been made before, and I didn't notice. Any excuse that would let me sleep in peace. But the universe seemed determined to break my courage. It was around 2 in the morning when I woke up again, and this time the noise was different. It wasn't just lowing, it was like scratching on the walls, heavy, dragged scratching, like something was trying to claw its way through the wood. And the worst part came from the direction of the living room, where I'd put the yard trash along with the doll. I stayed paralyzed for a while, listening to that, until I got the courage to get up and take a look. When I got to the living room, it felt like the world had frozen. The trash can where I'd thrown the doll was knocked over on the floor, scattered. And right in the middle of the floor was the damn doll, whole and clean, like someone had just made it and put it there for me to see. I know I should have run, called someone, done anything, but at the time I just stood there staring. And I swear by everything most sacred, the doll moved. It wasn't much, it wasn't like getting up and walking, but it gave a shiver like it had breathed, like there was life inside that dry, sewn thing. I got out of there right away, ran to the bedroom, locked the door, and spent the rest of the night awake, listening to the scratching sounds going back and forth through the house, like something was prowling around, waiting for me to make a wrong move. After that night, I couldn't pretend it was just in my head anymore. And look, I really tried to spend the next day thinking it could be stress, that I was alone in an old house, tired, that maybe I'd even dreamed while awake, I don't know. But deep down, I knew there was something there, something that shouldn't have been messed with. I didn't even go near the living room again. I stayed locked in the bedroom until dawn, hoping to hear footsteps, doors opening, anything that would force me to run out of there. But there was nothing, just that strange silence, that weight in the air that seemed to increase and decrease, like the house was breathing with me. The next day I packed my things however I could and went back to the city. I left the house behind, contract, deposit, everything. I didn't even look back. When the owner called asking why I'd left so suddenly, I just said it didn't work out, that it was farther than I thought, that the job had changed. And to tell the truth, to this day I repeat that to everyone. It's easier to make up an excuse than try to explain that a doll made with a cow's tongue drove me out of that house. Look, I was never much of a believer in ghost stories, curses, bad things, that stuff. I always thought people exaggerated, you know. A cousin of mine swore that faith healers worked miracles, that neighbors cast spells. To me, it was all stories from people who had nothing better to do. I was, and still am partly, the type who thinks everything has an explanation, electrical failure, hallucination, coincidence. So when I say that what happened at my cousin's wedding left me with a nagging feeling, well, it's because it was different from anything I'd ever experienced. And look, I tried to explain it, tried until I was exhausted. hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. I was never one to believe in witches and witchcraft, Always thought those old country stories were just ways to scare kids into staying home after dark. But I was also always too curious for my own good. Maybe that's why even now, just writing this down, my hands are shaking. I grew up between Bakersfield and Fresno, in California's Central Valley, where the older folks still whisper when talk turns to crossroads business. I'd always heard that if you heard 3 crickets singing together at a dirt crossroads, you were supposed to turn around right then and walk away without looking back, without stopping, without breathing too loud. But in 2009, I decided to do exactly the opposite. I wanted to see with my own eyes what was so dangerous about it. Grabbed an old flashlight, snuck out of the house, and headed to what folks called Devil's Junction. It was just a forgotten piece of dirt road crossing in the middle of nowhere, but they say the name tells you everything you need to know. And look, I saw things, I saw more than I should have, and I paid for it. I'd always lived that routine that only country folks know well. Wake up with the roosters, eat scrambled eggs with black coffee, help my dad in the fields, listen to my mom praying quietly while hanging laundry on the line. Life out there was simple, and maybe that's exactly why the stories ran so wild, like fear was just another part of the day. There was this old woman nearby, Mrs. Eulalia, who people said could heal anything: evil eye, shingles, fright. If a kid fell out of bed, they'd run to her. If the corn wouldn't grow, it was her they'd call. And every time she passed that dirt road, she'd cross herself and mutter something when she crossed Devil's Junction. I thought it was funny, to tell you the truth. Never really understood why so much respect for a piece of ground. Back then, we didn't have much to keep us busy. No internet, cell phones were for those who could afford them. And the nights were long, quiet, full of sounds we learned to ignore. But there was one thing nobody ignored: the cricket songs. Especially when they started singing in threes. It seemed silly, but even the toughest men would get serious when they heard it. Like it was a warning that only those who grew up there really understood. That day, I remember the afternoon felt different. Wasn't strong wind or rain or anything, but the sky got kind of whitish, colorless, like the day had gotten stuck between light and dark. I even mentioned it to my dad, but he just grumbled that it was changing weather and kept hoeing the yard. After dinner, which was always early because nobody liked being out after night truly fell, I sat on the porch messing with an old radio. Suddenly, between one static burst and another, I swear I heard sounds that seemed like children's giggles, real soft. But there were no kids around there, especially not at that hour. I figured it was just my imagination, but when I turned off the radio accidentally, I noticed 3 crickets, one song, but split into 3 perfect points of sound, perfectly synchronized, coming from the direction of the road. I should have gone inside. I should have forgotten about it. But that's when I decided to grab the flashlight and head to Devil's Junction. The walk there wasn't far, but that night it felt like the road had doubled in size. Every step I took, it seemed like the night sounds pulled away from me, like even the animals knew I was going where I shouldn't. The flashlight trembled in my hand, but I told myself it was just the little chill of early morning, nothing serious. When I got close to the crossroads, the first thing I felt was the smell. It wasn't the smell of grass or dead animals. It was a strange smell, kind of sweet and burnt, like someone had mixed green leaves with hair and set it on fire. I almost turned back right then, but that's when I heard the three crickets again. Only this time, their song seemed louder, faster, like they were calling me. The flashlight started failing right when I saw it. In the middle of the dirt road, at a distance that seemed too close, there was a little fire burning, and around it was someone. A woman dancing in circles, barefoot, her dress all torn, her body all stained black like she'd rolled in soot. And with every turn she made, the cricket song got higher, stranger, until it became something that didn't sound like animal noise anymore. I stood there, crouched behind some bushes, trying to understand what I was seeing. The woman didn't seem to care about anything around her, just spun and spun like she was trapped in a rhythm that wasn't hers. Sometimes she'd throw things in the fire, and the flames would jump blue and green, making crackling sounds that seemed like soft laughter. That's when I realized what she was burning. It wasn't just paper or dry leaves. Through the smoke, you could see bone pieces, tufts of hair that still had scalps stuck to them. And the worst part, I swear I saw teeth mixed in there. Human teeth. My heart raced so hard I thought she'd hear it, but the crickets heard it instead, because suddenly their song changed. It stopped being music and became a weird noise, like a creaking sound, as if something very old and heavy had started dragging itself through the brush. The woman stopped spinning all at once, stood with her back to me, motionless, and I felt that if she turned around, if she looked at me, something inside me would break in a way that couldn't be fixed. And that's when my flashlight made a loud crack and died completely. I stayed there trying to hide behind the bushes, but it seemed like she sensed my presence anyway. When the flashlight died, the woman stopped spinning in a sharp way, like she'd been pulled by something invisible. For a second, she stood there looking at the fire, and I thought maybe she'd leave. But instead, she crouched down quick, stuck both hands right into the coals like the fire didn't burn, and pulled out a bunch of bones still smoking. And then, with a calm that didn't seem human, she started stuffing those bones into her own mouth, one by one, like she was chewing stones. I heard the crack of bones breaking between her teeth, even from far away. It was a dry sound, cutting through the silence like a knife. When she lifted her face, mouth all dirty with ash and blood dripping down her chin, she looked straight in my direction even without seeing me clearly and said, "One for me, one for you." And at that moment, the cricket song became an absurd racket, like the whole brush had woken up to see what was going to happen to me. I tried to run, tried to scream, tried anything, but it felt like the ground had stuck to my feet, and everything around me was melting along with the fire. I don't really remember how I got out of there. The last thing my head registered was that sound of bones breaking in her mouth, and the fire blinking like it was going to die and light up at the same time. After that, everything became a blur. When they found me 3 days later, I was lying right in the middle of the crossroads, flat on my back, skin all covered with dust and scratches, looking like a rag doll that had been thrown away. They say I was still breathing, but I wasn't saying anything. My eyes weren't there anymore. Just 2 deep, dry holes. And my mouth was full of dead crickets. So many that some were still falling out the corners of my lips. I don't remember any of that. Others are the ones who tell it. I only remember the sound of crickets, the smell of burnt things, and that phrase echoing in my head like it had been written directly into my memory. One for me, one for you. Even today, when I close my eyes, or what's left of them, I still feel the sensation of bugs crawling inside my skull. And that was just the first story of our night, huh? If you were already afraid of crickets, now maybe you'll think twice before crossing a crossroads in the dark. If you're enjoying these stories, go ahead and leave your like here on the video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss the next stories coming up. And comment down below, have you ever heard a similar story? Got any strange legend from your town that not everyone knows about? We love reading your stories, and who knows, the next tale might be based on one of them. Now take a deep breath, because the next case might make you look different even at your own reflection. Look, I was never much of a believer in ghost stories, curses, bad things, that stuff. I always thought people exaggerated, you know. A cousin of mine swore that faith healers worked miracles, that neighbors cast spells. To me, it was all stories from people who had nothing better to do. I was, and still am partly, the type who thinks everything has an explanation: electrical failure, hallucination, coincidence. So when I say that what happened at my cousin's wedding left me with a nagging feeling in the back of my mind, well, it's because it was different from anything I'd ever experienced. And look, I tried to explain it, tried until I was exhausted. It was supposed to be a happy day, you know. That normal wedding rush, people sweating in the rented hall, kids running around in suits, grandma complaining about the food, everything you'd expect. But out of nowhere, in the middle of the ceremony, something happened that to this day I can't repeat out loud without feeling that weird chill in my stomach. I'm going to tell you everything here the way I remember it. It might even seem silly at first, but I guarantee by the end you'll understand why I was never the same after that day. To help you understand better, let me explain. My cousin was always very down to earth, one of those people who organize weddings like it's a business project, you know. Guest spreadsheets, budgets down to the napkins, everything timed to the minute. And I was there more just to go along. Family small, so I ended up helping set things up at the church too. The ceremony was going normally, beautiful even. Nothing strange, no heavy energy or anything. It was an old church in town, one of those where the peeling paint even helps give it charm. Wooden pews that creaked when we sat down. Smell of flowers mixed with that old dust from the carpet. Normal stuff. But there was a moment that caught my attention, and I swear at the time I laughed to myself, like, look at my imagination working. It was when I noticed that among the guests, there was a woman nobody seemed to know, like absolutely nobody. And it wasn't because she was a distant relative, no. It was the way she was standing, you know. Head down, veil covering her whole face, a dress kind of out of style, like she'd dressed wrong for the wedding. I remember thinking, wow, what weird vibes from this lady. Must be some eccentric aunt I've never seen. And I went back to paying attention to the ceremony without giving it much thought. After all, big church, scattered family, it happens. But the truth is, deep down, part of me felt uncomfortable, like there was something out of place, and I was pretending it was nothing. The problem is that after I noticed her, it seemed like I couldn't stop looking. Not that I wanted to, you know. It was like when you feel there's a cockroach in the corner of the room and even trying to ignore it, your eye goes there by itself. And the more I looked, the more wrong it seemed. She didn't move, didn't change position, didn't turn her head, nothing. While everyone else whispered, smiled, cried, that woman was like a stone planted in the middle of the church. There was a time when the priest asked everyone to stand up, and I noticed she stayed seated. That's when, for the first time that day, I caught myself getting goosebumps out of nowhere. And look, it was so hot that didn't even allow for these things. The excuse I gave myself was that she must be elderly, must be tired, I don't know. But when I really paid attention, I saw that her dress didn't look like an old lady's thing. It was white too, but kind of yellowed, torn at some edges, like it had been stored wrong for years. Still trying to find an explanation, I turned to my cousin who was next to me and asked quietly, "Who's that one over there?" He looked where I pointed, frowned, and said he didn't see anyone different. He laughed and told me to stop drinking in secret before the party. But I was completely sober. That's when the thing really started bothering me, because either I was going crazy or there was something very wrong happening in that place. The ceremony dragged on, and I tried not to look at her, but it was like the woman pulled my attention all the time, like a magnet. You know, there was a moment right in the vows part when her veil started moving. But it wasn't that normal swaying of someone breathing or an air current. It was like the veil itself was trembling, like it had a life of its own. I closed and opened my eyes quick, like trying to shake off the image. But when I looked again, the veil simply tore. It wasn't pulled. It wasn't someone who bumped into it accidentally. It simply tore by itself, right in the middle, opening like something was pushing from the inside out. And what I saw, look, I really wish I had imagined it, because what was there wasn't a normal face, not by a long shot. It was like a skull still with pieces of flesh stuck to it, but it wasn't living flesh. It was something kind of gray, kind of dry, like it had been rotting for a long time. And the worst part, even without any eyes, I swear she stared at me. The whole hall seemed to continue normally. Nobody screamed, nobody pointed, nobody even looked in her direction, just me. It was like for everyone else, she didn't even exist. But for me, it was like the whole world had stopped, and only that thing existed, looking straight into me. I don't know how long I stood there staring at her, but it felt like an eternity. I only know that when the woman stood up completely, she didn't walk to the door like any person would. She went straight to the altar, in the middle of the ceremony, in the middle of the bride and groom, the priest, the groomsmen, everyone. And nobody, absolutely nobody, seemed to notice. It was like she passed between them like a shadow. The worst part was when she stopped right in front of the bride, who was there smiling, emotional, with no idea what was happening. The woman raised a hand that looked more like a handful of bones covered by dead skin and touched my cousin's belly. It was a light touch, almost delicate, but I saw it with my own eyes. The bride shivered all over right then. She trembled like she'd been shocked. My first reaction was to try to get up and do something, but it felt like my legs had forgotten how to work. I could only stay there watching with a horrible feeling rising up my spine, like I was watching something that wasn't supposed to be seen, like I was breaking an invisible rule. After touching her belly, the woman simply disappeared. There was no smoke, no noise, nothing dramatic. She just wasn't there anymore. 1 second she was there, the next she wasn't. I blinked, looked around, turned my head everywhere. Nothing. It was like she had never existed. The worst part is that when I looked back at the altar, my cousin was different. She was still smiling, but it was a kind of stuck smile, kind of forced, like she was frozen in a role she didn't know how to play right anymore. That's when I realized that even without wanting to believe in these things, I wasn't going to be able to just forget what I saw. After that day, I swear I tried to forget for real. I went back home, back to work, filled my head with other things. I spent weeks convincing myself that it had been just stress, too much heat, strange light from the church, anything that could justify that. But a few weeks later, my mom called me, said my cousin was pregnant, and that it had been a surprise because she and her husband weren't even trying yet. And I froze. I didn't say anything, of course. There was no way to say anything. How was I going to explain that I saw something touching her belly before everyone else, in the middle of the wedding? I'd sound like a madman. I remember staying for hours looking at the ceiling that night, thinking if I should tell someone, if I should do something. But in the end, I just kept my mouth shut. What good would it do? Everyone was happy. It was better to let it go. But as the pregnancy progressed, problems started. Strange exams, confused doctors, bed rest recommendations, always something kind of out of the ordinary. And every time someone commented on it, I felt that shiver rise again, like some part of me knew there was something wrong from the beginning. To this day, I'm ashamed to admit I saw it and said nothing, that I let it happen without doing anything. And honestly, I don't even know if it would have helped. The baby was born a few months later. Everyone in the family was anxious. That party atmosphere again, presents here and there, decorations everywhere, those things. I was trying to force myself to be happy too, like ignoring that weight in my chest that I'd carried since the wedding, pretending everything was right. But then came the news. The baby was born healthy, breathing well, heart beating strong, but without eyes. I remember exactly the phrase my mom used on the phone. He was born without eyes. It wasn't that they were closed or that there was some incomplete formation. It was like they had never existed. Smooth and white. Right then, I lost strength in my legs. I sat on the living room floor without even realizing it. I stayed there listening to my mom talking, asking if I was listening, while my head went back to the image of that woman, that touch, that empty stare inside the church. I swear I tried to think of some medical explanation, genetics, anything. But the more I tried, the more it felt like my head was hitting an invisible wall. Like there was a limit to the logic I could use. Like the rational part of me was trying to protect what was left of my sanity. I never told anyone about what I saw, not my cousin, not my parents, much less her husband. Because honestly, what was I going to say? That I saw a dead woman touch her at the altar and knew something horrible was going to happen. To this day, I pretend I don't believe in these things, that everything has an explanation. But there are nights I wake up in the dark and stare at the ceiling with the feeling that any moment that torn veil will appear in front of me again. I don't really know how to start this, but there are days when this story keeps hammering in my head so much that I think if I don't tell it, it'll end up weighing even more. It might be that a lot of people will think it's an exaggeration or that I'm making it up, but I swear every word I'm going to write here really happened to me a few years ago. I think it was in 2012. I was living in a forgotten little town in rural New Mexico called St. Mary's Hollow. Anyone from the region has heard about the church ruins on top of the hill, but nobody has the courage to get too close, especially after what they say happened there with a witch they called the Blessed One. I didn't pay much attention to these stories. I thought it was old people's stuff, trying to scare others. If regret could kill, I wouldn't even be here to write this. At the time, I was in my early 20s, head full of nonsense, and wanting to challenge everything and everyone. So one hot afternoon, I took my bike and rode up to the ruins. I thought it would be just another stupid adventure to tell friends about later. I had no idea what was waiting for me up there. St. Mary's Hollow was that kind of place where time seems to move slower, you know. Cobblestone streets, bakery that closes at 6 in the evening, people who know each other by last names. My life was too quiet for my restless head, so I was always looking for something to do. Anything that seemed different from what everyone thought was normal. The church, or what was left of it, was on top of the hill, kind of crooked in the middle of tall grass, with some burned walls that still resisted even after so many years. When I was a kid, the older folks would say there were bad things up there, that the so-called Blessed One held masses her own way, mixing prayer with witchcraft, and that's why they decided to burn everything down. They also said that after that, the crops around it dried up and the hill got heavy, that it gave you headaches just getting close. Back then, I thought these stories were funny. But if there's one thing I learned, it's that in small towns, what seems like superstition sometimes hides serious stuff. My grandma herself, every time she passed the road that led to the hill, would bless herself 3 times and spit on the ground. I'd laugh at her, of course, but now I understand. When I went up there that day, the sky was clear, nice and blue, but it seemed like as I got closer to the church, the wind changed. The heat got stuffy in a strange way. I should have turned around right then, but the urge to prove it was all nonsense was stronger. The first strange thing was the smell. It wasn't the smell of burnt things or mold that I expected, but a kind of metallic smell that stuck in your nose and seemed to get worse when I got closer to the rubble. And the worst part is there was no wind up there, but the dry leaves on the ground were shaking like something was passing underneath them. I remember stepping on a board that creaked way too loud for the silence that was there. It was that kind of silence that not even birds risk breaking, you know. The wood gave way a little, and when I pulled it with my foot, I saw there was a hole right under what was left of the altar. And it was there, in the middle of all that dirt and ash, that I saw the book. It was stuck sideways, like it had tried to hide or like someone had tried to hide it in a hurry. The cover was dark leather, almost black, but full of deep marks, like claws or nails had scratched it hard. There was no title, no symbol, nothing written on the outside, just those marks, deep enough to make you sick just looking at them. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. Part of me wanted to reach out and pull it right away. Another part said to leave it alone. I should have listened to that part, but curiosity spoke louder. When I touched the book, I felt the cover was strange, kind of cold, kind of sticky, like it was alive somehow. But I forced my hand and pulled it anyway. I took it out of the hole and sat on a piece of fallen wall to try to open it. And that's when things really started going wrong. The moment I turned the cover, a strong smell of old blood mixed with rust rose up, the kind that seems to get in your throat and won't come out. And the worst part is the smell didn't come from anywhere visible. It was like it came from the paper itself. The pages were thick, yellowed, full of dark stains that I didn't even want to know what they were. The writing looked like a mix of Old English and Latin, all crooked, kind of shaky, like it had been written by hand by someone who was in a big hurry or very scared. I couldn't even read it right because as soon as my eyes hit the first line, I felt an absurd pressure inside my head, like they'd stuck a drill between my eyes. My nose started bleeding out of nowhere, without even having time to understand what was happening. And that's all I remember before passing out right there in the middle of the brush, with the book open on my lap. I woke up I don't know how many hours later, with the sun almost setting, throat dry like I'd gone days without drinking water. And the book was closed beside me, like nothing had happened. The bike was still there, but it took me a while to be able to get up and go down the hill. My head felt like it was full of cotton, my body heavy. But I swore to myself I was going to forget about it and move on with my life. Little did I know it was just the beginning. In the following days, I tried to convince myself it had been just too much heat, dehydration, something like that. But the truth is, deep down I knew it wasn't. Even so, I did what any hardhead would do. I put the book under the bed and tried my luck again. On the first night, I had a weird dream, one of those where you wake up in a cold sweat and don't really remember what it was. Just that feeling of something wrong stuck to you. On the second night, the dream was clearer. I saw a woman, or what seemed to be a woman, walking in a strange way, like all her bones were out of joint. Her skin was gray, kind of crumbly, and her face was the worst because it didn't have a mouth, just a smooth hole where it should be. And she was coming toward me, slowly, dragging her feet while the ground cracked behind her, like the whole world was falling apart. I woke up with my heart racing, breathing failing, and I swear for a few seconds I still heard that strange sound in the room, a noise that seemed like someone hissing without making sound. I sat on the bed with sweaty hands, looking under the bed where the book was stored. I knew I had to get rid of that thing, that I had to throw it far away, but something held me back. And it was on the third night that everything got worse. I woke up suddenly with a weight on my chest, like someone had sat on top of me. I opened my eyes and the book was there, open on top of my body, the pages turning by themselves like a strong wind was passing through, but the whole room was still, without a breeze. And the worst part is that I felt a warm line running from my nose to my mouth, the same iron taste I'd felt at the church. Right then, I didn't think twice. I pushed the book to the floor so hard I almost fell out of bed with it. I turned on all the lights in the house, opened windows, doors, everything. But the air still felt thick. It felt like something had stayed there, watching me, waiting for me to make a wrong move. I spent the rest of the night awake, keeping an eye on the bedroom door and the book there, open on the floor, the pages motionless now, but like they were just waiting for me to get distracted. The next day, with the sun beating down hard and the false courage you get in the morning, I tried to burn the book in the backyard. I got alcohol, paper, set it on fire, did what I could. But instead of really catching fire, only black, heavy smoke came out that left an unbearable smell of burnt flesh, like it was something alive falling apart. But when the smoke cleared, the book was whole, not even singed. And I can't explain it, but it seemed like the claw marks on the cover were even deeper, almost like they'd made new ones while I was trying to destroy it. After that day, I didn't even try anymore. I hid the book again, but the feeling of being watched never left. And the worst part is that even without touching it, I started seeing things where I shouldn't. Words appearing in the shadow on the wall, letters dripping in the sink water, phrases scribbled in the mirror steam. Always disconnected phrases, always calling me to read, always pulling me. That's when I understood it wasn't just the book, it was the act of reading. It was opening space for something that didn't want to be awakened. After all that, I kind of created some rules for myself. I stopped reading anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. I don't read letters. I don't read street signs, sometimes not even medicine instructions. I avoid it. I'd rather ask others or memorize by the packaging. It might seem crazy to those on the outside, but I know what I saw. I know what I felt, and I'm not going to give that thing a chance to open up again. The book is still with me. I know I should have found a way to get rid of it. I don't know, bury it somewhere deep or throw it in a river. But every time I think about it, I get an even worse feeling, like I'd be calling attention to something that's quiet for now. So it's hidden in a place I don't even look at anymore. And even so, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, feeling that iron smell in my mouth. Or I see some crooked words appearing on the bedroom wall when the light is dim. I can't explain it right, but it's like the book doesn't need itself anymore to try to reach me. Like what matters now is me, not it. Like I'd become an open door. I know a lot of people turn on the CB radio just to pass time, shoot the breeze, crack jokes, but I could never hear that static without remembering him. It's strange to say it so directly, but I never turned off that radio even after my dad passed. The rig was his, the highway was too. And that dry crackle of the CB filling the cab in the darkness. It was like he was still there, quietly, waiting for something. My dad rolled his truck on the stretch between Bakersfield and Fresno, Highway 99. Sharp curve, early morning, wet pavement. They say it was quick, that he didn't suffer, but who can guarantee that, right? What I know is that I should have gone with him on that run, but I made up some excuse. Said I was tired, and he went alone. After that, there was no more Christmas, no decent conversation at the dinner table. The family stayed together on the outside, but it felt like everything had shattered from within. And me, I became a trucker on impulse. Nobody asked me to. I just took the rig that was left and hit the road. The highway was the only thing that still made any sense, except for one detail. His CB radio, that old unit he'd soldered himself a few times, which would crackle every time the truck hit 70. It never stopped working for me, even when it shouldn't have. It was on an April night. I was heading back empty from Lowe's Angels, tired, in no hurry. I passed through Coalinga after midnight, and then came the decision whether to tackle the mountain pass or stop. But something pushed me forward. I swear I had no reason to go down that grade at that hour, but I did. Before the first curve, I turned on the CB, don't even know why, just that muffled static. I left it on the channel we always used. He said it was in case we needed to talk in the silence. Put it there and just listened to the weak noise, cutting in and out, sounding like wind. Then it hit 3:14 a.m. I remember exactly because I looked at the dashboard when it happened. The voice. A dry voice, familiar. That intonation of someone who'd called 1,000 times and was always heard. "Son, you hearing me?" Right then, I locked both arms on the steering wheel. My eyes started tearing up without even knowing why, and I spoke, or tried to, "Who's there?" which came out more like a tangled whisper. Silence for 2 seconds. Then came the phrase that destroyed me, "Why did you leave me there?" And then the CB died on its own. No noise, no click, just went dead. I pulled over to the shoulder like a desperate man, left the truck there, crooked, hazards blinking. I stared at the radio like it might give me some explanation. I tried messing with the wires, the switch, nothing. The unit was dead, and when I tried to turn it back on, no lights, no static. That curve was exactly where his truck had been towed from, the same one. Can't be a coincidence. I didn't sleep right after that. Didn't tell anyone either, not even my wife. I thought I'd lost it, but it was his voice. It was. A few days later, I decided to continue the route. Went down to Southern California, drove around, tried to distract myself, but all it took was crossing that same stretch again, almost a week later. And the CB lit up on its own, even though it was off, even though there was no signal. Again at 3:14, and just one sound this time. Sun. That's when I started keeping notes. Made a notebook, each date, time, phrase. I tried recording with my phone once, but the audio came out blank. I tried to replace the unit, but never followed through, because deep down I was afraid of losing that voice forever. Until I decided to take the CB to a guy in Bakersfield who fixes these old radios, good people. One of those who still talks looking you in the eye. He opened the unit and went silent. Showed me the inside, everything rusted, burned out. Some circuits weren't even soldered anymore. Said there was no way that thing could have turned on, not even with prayer. This thing's been dead for a long time, my friend. This here's just decoration now. I left the shop like I'd been hit in the back of the head, because that only confirmed what I feared most. What I was hearing couldn't be coming from there. After that, there was no more running from it. Every time I passed through that mountain pass, the CB would make some kind of noise. Sometimes it was just a crack, sometimes interference with a low voice, sometimes just his name. And always at 3:14, like an internal clock, except from something that had stopped ticking years ago. Once I decided to test it, left at dawn just for that. Did the whole stretch listening to music with the CB turned off and disconnected. But when the clock turned, it lit up. Not the panel, the voice. "Why didn't you come with me?" It was like the whole truck got cold. The dashboard lights flickered, the engine didn't stall, but my hand did. I had to pull over. Stayed there for about 10 minutes, staring ahead, without the courage to even breathe deep. That became part of my routine and nobody knew. I stopped counting even with myself. Just wrote down the phrases, the days, as if that would become a puzzle, but it didn't. It became a wound. There was one day I almost answered. The voice said, "Son, you hearing me now?" And I opened my mouth, but could only say, "Don't do this to me, Dad." Right then, the radio squealed so loud it hurt my ears. I accidentally hit the dashboard. It seemed like the truck had turned against me. I started avoiding that mountain pass. Took detours, longer routes, lost time and money, but it was better than facing all that again. But the world doesn't revolve around you, avoiding everything. There was a recent haul about 3 months ago that could only be delivered going through there, and I had nobody to send in my place. I accepted with a knot in my throat. I climbed praying silently, everything dark, everything wet, just like the day he left. But this time something was different. When it hit 3:14, I turned off the CB first. Even pulled the power cable, but the voice still came. Not from the radio, it came from the sleeper behind me. "Take me home, son." I swear I didn't turn around. Just looked in the rearview mirror, saw nothing. But I felt a heavy yet familiar presence. Like when you know someone from your family is nearby without needing to see them. I accelerated until I almost got sick. Reached the next town shaking and slept with the engine running, just so I wouldn't be in the silence. Since then I changed everything. Traded the truck, threw out the CB, started taking only local freight, short stuff. But none of that erased what remained, because the strangest part came after. A fellow trucker I barely know called me the other day. Said he was going down the mountain when he heard on the CB a weak voice calling son. He thought it was a joke, but when he answered, the voice disappeared. Another said he heard the same thing, but with static so loud he had to turn it off. And that's when I realized something that chilled me to the bone, that stretch where he died. People are hearing what I heard, and people are responding. Maybe it's not just with me. Maybe it never was. Sometimes I think that part of the highway keeps those who were left with the last word stuck in their throat, those who should have gone along, but stayed. And there's a phrase that won't leave my head to this day. The last thing he said on the radio, days before leaving. "We'll talk on the way back, son." But he didn't come back, and still he talks. Maybe he'll keep talking forever. And maybe if I ever answer with all the words, it'll be my time to stop there too. There are radios that only pick up one frequency. The one of what we didn't have the courage to say in life. And there are truckers who never come down from the mountain, even after they're gone. I don't know if what happened to me was a warning or just one of those things nobody can explain. But after that day, I even changed my route. And it wasn't fear of the road, it was fear of what seemed to be already written. I've been running this stretch for over 20 years. Started with a borrowed truck, sharing loads with a partner. Today, I have my old warhorse, but it's mine. I've always hauled mostly between Texas and Louisiana, mainly along Interstate 20. I know every pothole, every truck stop, every roadside diner where folks stop for coffee and conversation. And it was at one of those that the thing happened. There's a little diner after the Shreveport exit, kind of hidden, with a burned-out sign and a poorly made wooden fence. Only people who already know it stop there, people who are really from the road. The owner is a quiet woman, always wearing an apron stained with coffee, and who never makes change wrong. I'd stopped there dozens of times. I'd eaten cold hash browns there, slept leaning against the concrete bench outside. That day it was drizzling, and I stopped just to wait for the weather to improve. It was about 3 in the afternoon. The road was empty. I went in, ordered coffee, and was fiddling with the old radio I have. When I heard the sound of the wooden shelf banging, she had dropped a cardboard box full of old receipts. Those receipts where people wrote down names, amounts, and whether they'd paid or not. She bent down kind of awkwardly, and I went to help, because everything had scattered on the floor. When I picked up about 3 receipts to stack them, my eyes landed on a piece of paper with worn edges and a name that froze my chest. It was my full name, first, middle, and last. Same spelling down to the accent. Below in crooked handwriting it said, "Already died at Devil's Curve mile marker 42. I froze, just said, This name here is me." She stopped too, looked. The color of her face changed, and that was the first thing that made me suspicious. She didn't think it was funny, didn't try to say it was a coincidence. She just took the receipt from my hand, stuffed it back in the box, and said that was old paper, stuff from people who had worked there before, that nobody updated that anymore. I still tried to laugh kind of nervously, said, "Well, then I already died and don't know it." She didn't answer, went straight to the counter. That reaction of hers threw me off. I drank the coffee without tasting it, left slowly, but my head wouldn't settle. What was that? Coincidence. Someone with the same name. But it was the same road I drove every week. The Devil's Curve at mile marker 42, I already knew. And that's where things started getting out of control. 2 days later, at a truck stop in Marshall, I ran into 2 acquaintances, people from the old route. We sat down to eat something and chat. And then out of nowhere, one of them said, "Man, I swear I saw you at that curve the other day." Truck stopped, headlights on, thought it was a breakdown. I froze. The other said he passed right after and saw the truck again, but with nobody inside. Thought it was strange, but kept going. I hadn't been through there that day. I was on another route further south. And that started repeating. People saying they saw my truck where I wasn't, that they heard someone shouting my name near the woods, that they saw a light flashing out of nowhere on the curve stretch, and always in the same place. Devil's Curve mile marker 42. I tried to ignore it. Told myself it was imagination, coincidence, someone with the same truck model. But nobody uses the same name, and nobody shouts your name in the middle of the woods for no reason. I started avoiding that piece of the interstate, took longer routes, made detours, invented excuses for the load. But even far away, the stories continued. A colleague even said he saw my truck climbing the hill alone, headlights on, but empty cab. And by then, I was already losing sleep. It seemed like there was something walking ahead of me, like someone or something had decided to live out an ending that hadn't arrived for me yet, but was already marked. One day I dreamed about the diner. I dreamed I walked in. Everything was the same, just empty. The radio made that old static, and there was the smell of cold coffee in the air. But what struck me most was that in the dream, the receipt with my name was already on the table, alone, standing up, as if someone had put it there for me to see. And when I got close, it didn't just say "already died" anymore. Something else was written underneath, just missing the right date. I woke up sweating. It was 4:30 in the morning. And as much as I try not to be the type of person who believes in everything, that messed with me too much. It was like the story had come to life without my permission. I didn't want to hear about it anymore, but the others wouldn't stop. People who said they saw me at stops where I hadn't been. Truckers who swore they'd honked at me on the road and I didn't even look. People who asked me, "You disappeared the other day," and I'd answer, I wasn't even there. One guy told me something that really gave me chills. "I called out your name, man. You turned your head, but there was no face, just shadow." When he said that, I froze. It was supposed to be a joke, but he was serious, speaking low, with a kind of scared look. Right then, I felt like the thing had gone from coincidence to something else. Something I don't have a name for, something I don't even know if I want to understand. I stopped driving at night, started checking the truck more frequently, as if that could prevent something. Started driving with a prayer hanging from the rearview mirror. Not that I'm too religious, but it was that or drive with fear. And the more I tried to forget, the more the name came back. One day I went to the DMV in Austin to resolve some issues, and when the woman pulled up my record in the system, it glitched. Her screen froze. A warning appeared saying, "Record not found." It took a few minutes to normalize. She said it was the system. That happens. But inside I thought, could this be part of the same absurdity? Another time I went to pay insurance, and the clerk said my social security number showed as inactive for a period of 3 days. Then it went back to normal. Temporary failure, according to them. But inside that hit me like a reminder that somewhere they'd already put me on the other side. And I never set foot in that diner again, not out of anger, not out of fear of the owner, but because the environment seemed contaminated after that. It was like every time I stopped there, someone was waiting to show me the paper again, as if the name had stuck there forever. The guys started noticing I was quieter, more to myself. One or two even joked, "Man, since they put your name on the list of those who already went, you've been different, you know." But there were one or two who didn't joke, just looked sideways with that look of someone who doesn't know whether to believe, or is just afraid of becoming the next name on the receipt. And that's why I'm telling this now, because I don't know how much longer I'll be driving through these parts. But I know that somewhere someone has already decided I shouldn't be here anymore. And if one day you're driving along Interstate 20 and see a white truck, dirty trailer, stopped with headlights on at Devil's Curve mile marker 42, don't honk. Don't stop to look, especially if you hear someone calling your name, because it wasn't just me who saw this happen. There was another driver about 2 months ago who passed through there and said he saw someone who looked a lot like me leaning against the truck's hood. The person didn't say anything, just kept their head down. He swore it was me. But I was in Austin that day, at the hospital with my daughter. He said he looked at the face and the face was normal, but the eyes were strange. Looked like glass, no shine. After that story, I turned off the CB for a week, just to see if the silence would help me. But that didn't solve it either, because the noise isn't in the radio, it's inside. And if you think all this is just a poorly told story, that's fine. I'd prefer it to be too, except I still have the paper. Yes, the receipt, that one from the first time, the one with my name. That afternoon, before leaving the diner, I pretended I was going to the bathroom. I went back quick, grabbed the folded paper, and stuffed it in my jacket pocket. I didn't want to do that, but my head said that if I left that thing behind, I'd end up going back there without meaning to. Like I'd pulled the thread of a destiny that was already written. Today that receipt is kept in a plastic bag inside a folder at the bottom of the closet. I never showed it to anyone, but I look at it from time to time, just to make sure the date hasn't changed yet. For now, it just has this written, already died at Devil's Curve mile marker 42. I keep driving less than before, slower, but I'm here. And when someone asks me if this story is true, I don't answer, because there are things that if you say them out loud, it seems like you're calling them. I was coming back from a forced break when they called me to cover an urgent route. It was a Thursday afternoon, quick thing, according to the guy from dispatch. Truck already loaded. I just needed to go to Phoenix and drop the pallets at a distribution center I already knew. Everything proper, documents printed, delivery receipt, signature on the bill of lading. I picked up the truck at the company's external lot in Riverside, One of those reserves that sit there when the fleet's short. The detail is that I'd never seen that truck before. Not that this is unusual. The company has over 100 vehicles, but the cab smelled like something new, clean dashboard, almost no signs of use. The air conditioning working like it had left the dealership yesterday. I was even kind of happy. Thought it was my luck. The freight was standard. Palletized automotive parts with electronic seal and transport guide printed with tracking code. Just load, sign, and go. The type of delivery I'd done 1,000 times. Common route, easy, and everything went normal. Quiet highway, light rain, near Blythe. I stopped at a truck stop just for coffee, seal intact. When I got to Phoenix, around 1 in the morning, the guys at the warehouse stopped me at the entrance gate. They said that load had already been delivered the day before. I froze, showed the paper with the order number, the exit receipt from Riverside, everything. The security guard went silent, called someone from receiving. 2 employees came, looked at the document like they'd seen a ghost. This order number was already cleared yesterday at 5:45 p.m., the guy said, checking the system. Then the bizarre part started. They said they didn't recognize the truck number, and the license plate wasn't listed as belonging to the company fleet. And more, according to them, nobody from headquarters had authorized another delivery of the same load. They asked me where I'd left from. When I said Riverside, Reserve Lot Section 3, they exchanged a strange look. They told me to wait in a corner in the security office. I started texting the dispatcher who had given me the job. Nothing. Call declined, disappeared from WhatsApp. I called the base, nobody answered. Then I opened my phone to show the route PDF, the same one I'd checked on departure. But the file was blank, just the header. Nothing about destination, nothing about items, nothing about schedule, just express load internal. The paper printed in my hand, same thing, just title and signature. The load details had disappeared. That's when I started getting really scared. I asked to access the truck's GPS. It showed that I had stopped at an empty lot in inland Southern California for almost 2 hours, but I swear I never parked there. I came straight, stopped at a familiar truck stop, and that's it. By then I was already sweating cold. I called the security guard again. Said there was something wrong with all of this, that the truck belonged to the company, that I got the key from Section 3, that there were people there. He made a call and came back pale. Said Section 3 had been under renovation since February. Nobody goes in there, nobody has keys. I said, then how did I leave with this truck from there? Silence. Minutes later, a man in a suit arrived. Said he was from the San Bernardino headquarters, calm, direct. Asked me to delete the messages, return the paper, and not comment with anyone about that delivery. These things happen sometimes. You can go home and rest, was the last thing he said. No report, no receipt, no second copy of the delivery. Right then, I just wanted to get out of there. But I swore to myself I'd come back the next day and resolve this. But when I returned to the base, the truck wasn't there anymore, disappeared from the lot, and nobody knew what truck that was, the license plate number. They said it didn't exist in the company registry. The cameras from the previous day were in maintenance, the Section 3 extensions out of service. But I know what I saw, what I drove, what I delivered. I was in that truck, I made that route, and that load was there, heavy, sealed with invoice, with everything. I just don't know exactly who I delivered to. And worse, I don't know who sent me. I was stuck with that for days. I'd wake up at dawn with the feeling I'd forgotten something. It wasn't even fear, it was anger. Anger at seeming like an idiot, at being alone in this story, at having driven over 500 miles with a load that officially never existed. I went after it, called acquaintances from the base, drivers who had made similar routes. One of them, older, answered me with a dry question. "Did you see any blue sticker on the side of the truck's dashboard?" Right then my spine went cold. I did see one. A laminated sticker pasted near the engine brake button. I didn't even notice. It just said Internal Control 8.4. I thought it was maintenance stuff. Then he told me, without giving much detail, that some trucks with that marking had disappeared from the lot in recent years. Always the reserves, the ones nobody sees directly, that stay in the back, away from the cameras. One of the drivers swore he'd left one of those parked with a full tank. And when he came back the next day, the truck had been written off in the system, marked as out of service. But it still existed, parked there for 1 or 2 more days until it disappeared. Another thing made me feel bad. I got into the company's internal system with a login from a friend who still trusted me. I went looking for deliveries made to that Phoenix warehouse on nearby days and found the order, the original one. Delivered as they had said 1 day before me. Same invoice number, same pallets, same weight. But one detail, the driver's name was unavailable. The digital signature in the system was also corrupted, and the truck that delivered was marked as unit under external evaluation. No plate, no fleet, no connection. There was the same order, delivered twice by 2 trucks that shouldn't exist. I went back to Riverside and went to the place where, according to me, I had left from, the lot under renovation. I got there early, jumped the fence from the back. There were no trucks, no cars, just recent tire marks on the gravel floor. Marks that shouldn't be there, since officially nobody had used that space for months. I went into the old locker room, pushed a kind of stuck door, and saw 3 clipboards hanging with laminated sheets. On them, load names, destinations, and truck codes. All started with 8.4, and under each sheet an observation. No return expected. I stopped there, started hearing the sound of a truck approaching from the other side of the lot. I thought someone had seen me break in, but the sound suddenly disappeared. When I went to the fence, there was nothing, not even raised dust. Just that dry silence of an abandoned place. I went home with the feeling that if I insisted more, I might be dragged again. I don't know if by someone or by something that has no name. I just know I was part of a route that doesn't exist, a displacement outside the system. And I wasn't the only one, because 2 weeks later, a friend sent me a photo of a truck parked on the shoulder of Highway 10. License plate covered by mud, door locked, and an identical blue sticker. When he came back with the police, the truck was no longer there. It's been 2 months since I've been trying to get on with life. I'm driving for other companies now. But sometimes, when I enter a new lot, I look toward the back and think, could that one there also have a blue sticker? I know it sounds like delirium, but the fear isn't that I made this up. The fear is that it was real and nobody else is talking, because they were already instructed to forget, or because they were used and erased afterward. I don't want you to believe everything I said, but if someday they call you for a last-minute route with a truck that's not in the system but is cleared, look carefully at the dashboard. If there's a blue sticker, refuse. Refuse even if it seems like just another simple freight job. I know there are a lot of people here who have driven at night on dirt roads, roads with nobody around, just forest on both sides. But have you ever tried to really sleep with this kind of memory coming back every month? Because there are things you don't forget even when you want to. At the time, the Trans-Canada Highway was chaos, and look, it wasn't even flood season. It was just potholes, washboard, spots without shoulders, fallen trees and trucks passing you with burned-out headlights. It was 2003, if I'm not mistaken, and I was still active, doing long hauls, the kind that take 3 or 4 days to reach the destination. I had about 43 years old, and that week, I took my wife and the 2 little ones with me. Something that wasn't so unusual for us, especially when the trip was long, and the freight allowed staying more than 1 day stopped afterward. My wife and I, we'd take turns at the wheel sometimes. It wasn't right, but the road forced us to invent these solutions. And she had a steady hand, drove better than many partners out there. The oldest, Leo, was 11, and the little one, Isabella, was about to turn 6. They slept hugging each other on the extended bunk in the cab. I remember them just like that, even after all this time. That day, we had left Thunder Bay after lunch, and the idea was to sleep near Nipigon. But the rain started getting heavy before time, and I was getting drowsy. I'd been tired since early, strange thing, like something was forcing me to close my eyes. When I saw it, it was almost 1 in the morning, and I was already blinking hard. That's when the missus suggested, "Pull over there, I'll take the wheel for a bit. You rest for half an hour." I resisted at first, but she insisted. I stopped at a dirt pullout, switched places with her, and lay down a bit with my feet, almost touching the kids. Now comes the part I wish I could say was my invention, but it wasn't. I remember her words like they'd been recorded on the truck's dashboard. She poked me and spoke without shouting, just firm. "Honey, there's a man standing on the road." I didn't even think straight. I opened my eyes forcefully, raised my head and looked at the windshield, the wiper going slowly, and the headlight catching right in the middle of the dirt road. There was a man standing right in the center, with his arms hanging by his sides and his head down, with something white covering his face, looked like a torn shirt tied behind his head. He wasn't facing away, he was facing forward, but you couldn't see anything of his face. The first sensation that came was of something wrong. It wasn't fatigue, wasn't fright, it was something deeper, like the body already knew that wasn't normal. And then almost together, I saw 2 more, one on each side of the road, further back. One of them was crouched, like he was messing with something at the edge of the woods. The other was standing, but turned sideways. Both also had their faces covered. The missus had already braked almost to a stop, but wasn't completely stopped yet. And I saw in the rearview mirror that the 2 men on the sides started moving. One turned around, the other got up. That's when my head started working for real. I pulled the console cover, where I kept an old defense object, something you don't even talk about nowadays. I stuck my hand in there with my heart beating in my neck, the headlights shining directly on the face of the man in the middle. And he didn't move. But the 2 from the side started walking toward the cab, and one of them had something wrapped in his arms. It was dark, but it had shine. It looked like a chain or a piece of thick wire. From far away, you could see it wasn't anything good. I didn't even think. I threw half my body out the window and fired upward, just one shot. Loud. They stopped. The one with the chain took 2 more steps, but then ran, disappeared into the woods on the right. The other did the same to the opposite side, and the one in the middle took 1 more second. Then he turned his body slowly and went into the bush like he was a ghost. I was with my hand shaking, the missus with her face covered in sweat, and the children still sleeping. I got out against her request. I got out, headlight on, ground slipping because of the rain. And the first thing I see is a length of old barbed wire, cut, stretched between 2 low stumps, right at the edge of the road. Low enough to go unnoticed in the dark, but high enough to blow out a truck tire. Maybe 2. They didn't want to stop the truck. They wanted us to stop ourselves and stay there in the middle of nowhere, without help, with the little ones inside. I dismantled the trap with my foot, still holding the defense object. Then I got back in and told her to get out of there as fast as possible. I didn't even ask if she wanted to, I just took the wheel. The road got darker, the rain got heavier, and the smell inside the cab was just fear and sweat. We left that stretch at almost 50 miles per hour, even with potholes, even with risk. And look, anyone who knows the Trans-Canada knows you don't do that at night. But at that moment, it was either tear up the truck or tear up the family. I chose the truck. The missus didn't say a word for a long time, just held the door handle with her hand white from tension. I could see from the corner of my eye, she didn't even blink. The kids kept sleeping, and that, as strange as it may seem, was what broke me inside. Because they went through all that without knowing. And if I hadn't woken up, and if she hadn't called me at that exact moment, and if we had gone over that wire, the truck would have blown the tires and gotten stuck in the mud without traction. And we would have been trapped, vulnerable, with 2 small children in the darkness of the Trans-Canada. And if those men wanted more than robbery, and if it wasn't even robbery, they were covered, all faces hidden, and the way they appeared, that wasn't desperate approach. It was ambush, it was planned. We only stopped when we saw city lights, a small town with 3 street lights, and a gas station that only opened during the day. I pulled over and turned off the truck. I stayed there, hands still shaking on the steering wheel. I looked at her and said, "Forgive me, I'll never put you guys through this again." She didn't answer right away. Only later in the morning, when the sun hit the load tarp, and Isabella woke up asking if she could have hot chocolate, my wife's answer came in the form of a look, one of those you understand without needing to hear. That day I delivered the load and didn't take a return load. I stayed 3 days stopped. Then I took my family back home, a little town near Sault Ste. Marie, and parked the truck for 3 weeks without touching it. But the worst wasn't the fear, it was the weight of almost, because almost has a more bitter taste than real. It comes back all the time. It wakes you up at dawn with your head saying, "What if, what if, what if?" I started avoiding sleep. I was afraid to dream about the covered faces, the chain, the sound of steps on wet ground. And even after everything, I still thought, were they armed? Were there really 3? What if there were more people in the woods? It didn't take long for my wife to make it clear, either the road or the family. She didn't say it with those words, but her silence said that every time I picked up the truck keys, her look at the children, the way she locked the gate as soon as I left. It was hard. The truck was my life, my livelihood, everything I knew how to do. But a month later I sold it. A partner of mine from Winnipeg bought it. I even gave him a discount and never took long hauls again. Today, I do small local transport with a pickup truck and never go out at night anymore, not even to get medicine. Some people hear this story and say it was luck. Others think I should have chased the guys, called the police, filed a report, tried to identify them. But at that moment, in that darkness, what I saw wasn't something you face with courage, you face with instinct. And instinct says, protect your own. I never understood why my wife woke up at that exact minute, or why she looked at the road and saw. But I know that if I had slept just 2 more minutes, just 2, maybe the story would be different, and maybe someone would be telling it for me. Until today, I ask myself what would have happened if she hadn't seen that first man, and if I had slept 2 more minutes. That dawn took away my taste for the road. Not because I lost something, but because I almost lost everything. I confess that currently I can't afford to refuse freight, especially coming from the county. Usually pays on time, no headaches. And when they told me the job was in Santa Fe, I accepted without thinking twice. I'd done similar stuff around there before. For the historical preservation folks, transporting old structures, pieces of antique ironwork, cast iron roofing, stuff that was dismantled and needed to go for restoration. But this time the request came in a strange way. The guy who called me, an old acquaintance, government employee who had referred me before, said he couldn't pass everything through text. He asked me to meet him near the high school football field around 9:30 at night. I thought it was excessive, but I went. He didn't explain much, just said the transport was a large iron structure that would leave a warehouse in the outskirts and needed to be taken to Albuquerque. The requirement was that pickup be done between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. No helper, no photos, and no questions. They justified it as vandalism prevention. They said the piece would be part of a memorial about oppression from the era of government overreach, and that it needed secrecy until the inauguration. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. Government has that kind of thing, but what got me was the air of urgency. It was like something that couldn't go wrong, and at the same time that nobody wanted to be seen doing. I accepted. On the agreed night, I arrived at the loading site a little before the time. Remote place, no sign, no cell signal. It was a warehouse with corrugated metal roof and sliding gate, but there was no public lighting or anything, just a spotlight powered by generator. 3 men were waiting for me, none in uniform, none with badges. They had left my truck already positioned, ramped down. The piece, I don't know what I thought I was going to see, maybe an iron arch, an old column, but what they showed me looked more like part of a cell. It was a rusted structure, with vertical bars cut in some parts, and a hook fixed at the top, on what seemed to be the inside. The metal had twisted parts, like it had been torn from another place. And the floor of the piece was what bothered me most, full of dark stains concentrated in just one corner. You couldn't say what that had been, but it looked like it had been washed poorly, like they wanted to erase what was obvious. I asked on impulse, "Is this really a monument?" One of the men answered without changing expression, "It's not what it was, it's what it represents." I regretted asking right away. The loading was quick. They knew what they were doing. No paperwork, no signature. When the truck was ready, they handed me a portable GPS, one of those that comes with the route already mapped, and said, "Just follow it, don't change anything in the route." I hit the road, started on secondary routes, cutting through the countryside until reaching Interstate 25. It was early morning, almost 2 a.m., and I was already starting to count the minutes to deliver that thing and get out of there. That's when they stopped me. It wasn't a checkpoint. It was a black patrol car without identification, pulled over out of nowhere with high beams and 2 armed men. One of them signaled with the flashlight for me to get out. They didn't ask for documents, didn't look at the cargo. What one of them said was just this: "You're transporting what needs to arrive. Don't deviate, don't photograph, don't open it." I just nodded. I went back to the cab with the feeling that this had been arranged long before I said yes. I arrived in Albuquerque around 3:40 a.m. The delivery address was a yard with iron gate and high wall, everything dark, but the gate had an envelope attached with electrical tape. Inside, the agreed amount and $700 more. No paperwork, no stamp, no return number. I left the truck where the paper indicated, closed the doors, and left. 2 weeks passed, and I still had that thing in my head, the structure, the hook, the stains. It wasn't a museum piece, at least not one you assemble to teach history. That looked more like something they tried to hide. I didn't tell anyone, not even my wife, but a month later a colleague from the city, a journalist I've known for a long time, called me to talk. She showed me the draft of a story she had tried to publish. The title, "Torture Cell Structure from Government Black Sites, Illegally Removed from State Archive." She talked about irregular transport, mentioned a warehouse in Santa Fe that had been emptied at dawn, and described the structure exactly like the one I hauled. She said it was part of an official collection that was protected, and that the removal violated a bunch of federal laws. The description matched, even mentioned a cattle truck that wasn't identified, but the story never came out. She said her own editor ordered everything removed, and that she had received an email saying the subject was too sensitive, that there wasn't enough proof, and that it wasn't advisable to insist. She asked me if I knew anything. I lied, said no, that it wasn't my business. 5 years later, in 2022, I was in Denver making a delivery for an event. And since I had time left, I went to walk around a civil rights exhibition center that was having a show about human rights and memory. I went in expecting nothing, just to see, and I saw it there in the middle, with indirect lighting and elevated floor. The piece, the structure, painted white, without stains, without dirt, with glass around it and a plaque saying, "Reinterpretation of oppression structures produced by contemporary plastic artist, symbolic piece, no historical value." I stayed about 30 minutes standing there. I didn't take photos, didn't call anyone, but I looked closely at the cell floor, where before there was that dark rust, there was still something. Under the paint, you could still see the stains, now protected by glass. I don't know what disgusted me more, the structure, the paint job, or the plaque saying that was just art. I didn't say anything. I went back to the truck and left. But that night, when I stopped at the truck stop to sleep, I had insomnia until morning. When you're a trucker, you learn that some loads have emotional value, others historical. Some are dangerous, others are just heavy. But that one was dirty, not the iron the way. You think you're transporting part of the past to be shown, but sometimes they're just using your truck to hide what should be seen. The county didn't want to leave a record. The press couldn't talk, and whoever should have kept it covered it up. The only thing that didn't lie was the floor of the piece. It's still there under the glass. And me, I only think about it again when someone talks about monuments, because now, every time I hear that word, I just remember what I saw being swept aside and packaged with a pretty name. The day they burned 2 of my colleagues was the only shift where I thought about running naked out of examination room 2. And look, I've seen people explode in body bags. I've seen a victim's jaw stuck in another person's boot. But that thing there was different. It was like the body had reacted to touch, like it had stored rage inside its stomach. My name doesn't matter, and I shouldn't even be recording this, but it's all saved just for myself. I've had enough warnings already. I worked 7 years at the Detroit Medical Examiner's office, specifically as a technical assistant in autopsy procedures. And no, that's not the same as a forensic pathologist. We're the ones who receive, position, open, close, wash, listen to what nobody wants to hear, and burn our hands on things that shouldn't be hot. The case was on March 3rd, 2021, a stifling dawn, one of those where you sweat standing still. I was at the end of my shift, which ran from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. 3 bodies to process, 2 from natural causes. The third entered the system as male, 42 years old, collected from a refrigerated truck, possible suffocation. Nothing out of the ordinary. Port, truck, collection with the police department, clean record. The unusual part was when that body was pushed from the mobile gurney to the metal table. The skin was hot, not warm, actually hot, like a piece of porcelain left in the sun. Except it was 4 in the morning, and the body had been transported in a frozen compartment. I remember Jonas, the newest technician, touched the guy's belly with the back of his glove and jerked away. "This one's more alive than I am," he said. We laughed. That tired shift laughter. The laugh of people who know that hot bodies can just be accelerated decomposition. But this one had no odor at all. No ammonia, no gas, no acidity. The abdomen was distended, really swollen. It looked like the guy had swallowed a balloon of air. We immediately grabbed the number 6 needle to do relief puncture, just to see if there was really air in there. And Jonas was the one who applied it. He pierced the left side of the stomach. 2 seconds later, the room became a greenhouse of sewage and heat. The sound wasn't gas escaping. It was a muffled crack, like something had been pulled from inside with force. The body belched a jet of wet, hot vapor directly into Jonas's face. He fell backward with a hoarse scream. His mask stuck to his skin. I heard the noise and the smell. My God, the smell was melted plastic mixed with wet hair. One of the most repulsive smells I've ever encountered. It was an oily vapor that stuck to clothes, eyes, scalp. The other technician, Marcus, tried to help, but as soon as he got close, he was hit too. He fell without being able to breathe, tearing his lab coat, moaning like a child. And there was nothing to clean it with, nothing that would provide relief. I wasn't hit directly, but I froze. I stood there with the scalpel in my hand, watching the 2 on the floor, the body with its belly pierced and the vapor rising slowly, like a poorly sealed pressure cooker. I stumbled out, hit the emergency button, vomited in the stainless steel sink. It was the only time the room 2 exhaust system turned on by itself. The temperature sensor went above standard. The air became heavy. You could hear the refrigeration alarm sounding as if something had caught fire. And no, there was no fire, no flame, no visible substance. But the two came out of there with real thermal injuries. Jonas went straight to Detroit General Hospital. Injured cornea, tissue loss on the side of his nose and cheekbone. To this day, he wears protection over his right eye. Marcus had internal burns in his nasal and throat mucosa. They were off for almost 3 weeks. I couldn't go back to room 2 since that day. The pathologists made an emergency report. I helped document what I could. We opened the abdomen with a care I'd never seen before. There was no normal fluid, no gastric juice, no bile, just a thick, yellowish liquid with the consistency of expired hair cream, with no defined pH, that's right. The lab couldn't classify the acidity level. It was as if the body itself had neutralized everything or created something new. I remember one of the chiefs commented that the stomach seemed to have been cooked from the inside, as if it had accumulated heat for hours without letting it escape. The question was simple: where did that come from? The man's record only said, collected at the port of Detroit around 3:40 a.m. after an anonymous tip. The body was inside a refrigerated truck that had just delivered a shipment. And that's when the part that still gives me chills came. The previous cargo wasn't food. It was an irregular batch of expired hospital supplies. Among the volumes, vials used in forced digestion exams, gastric retention products normally used in experimental tests to observe how the digestive system reacts to certain substances. In other words, there was stuff to hold gas inside a person's stomach, substances that create internal reactions but don't escape. The doubt began to grow. Had that man ingested this voluntarily, or was he forced to do it as part of some experiment? But what made me sickest was the identification tag. Because every victim arrives with a plastic strip on their ankle, right? This one was different. The protocol number wasn't external, it was visible under the skin, as if it had been laminated inside the flesh. I'd never seen that, and never saw it again. The reports were blocked. Room 2 was sealed for 12 days for exhaust maintenance, and the body disappeared. Collected by a man in a dark blue lab coat, no name, no protocol, no exit digitization. When I went to ask the department, they told me, this body is no longer on record. Must have been released with the others. Released to whom, if there was no relative, no responsible hospital, no origin record? That's when we start to realize that some things come in but don't go out. And there are stories that if we insist on remembering, were also removed. I went to a psychiatrist, got evaluated, stayed home for 3 months, never worked with bodies again. Nowadays, if I enter a hot environment with low ceilings, I feel the air running out. The smell returns. The mask sticks to my face even though there's nothing there. And every time someone says that bodies burp gas, I respond, yes, but some bodies spit hell. And sometimes it's because hell was stored inside them. The worst part of trauma isn't what you saw. It's when it starts repeating without being there anymore. Because after that shift, it wasn't just the smell that returned, it was the sound of the valve opening, the muffled crack, the sound of something being spit out with force. I started hearing this sound out of nowhere, sometimes coming from the kitchen wall, sometimes from the bathroom stall, always when the house was too closed, too hot. I went to the psychiatrist, took what they prescribed, pretended I was better. But every time they closed a door behind me, I saw myself again inside room 2 and Jonas's face, peeling as if it had been licked by something alive, pierced through me. But what really made me record this audio was what happened 2 months after my leave. One of the old technicians called me for coffee near the terminal. I thought it was just missing talking about work, but he called me because something strange had happened. The previous week, another body arrived with suspicious origin, also collected at the port, also inside a truck that had unloaded hospital supplies. But this time, the entry protocol was canceled before the body arrived, meaning the system already knew that body wouldn't officially exist. This colleague, I'll call him Leo, only managed to take a picture of what he found strange. It was the body's foot, and once again the tag wasn't outside the skin, it was inside. You could see the outline of the strip under the epidermis, a laminated rectangle attached to the flesh, with a printed numerical code. But now, instead of a protocol number, there was a code RG9221R. Leo thought it might be something related to retention, some type of internal retention test, as if the bodies were containers. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, never was. But when I saw the photo and remembered the hot jet that came out of that man's stomach, I only thought of one thing. They're testing the living container, stomach as containment tube, people as capsules. You might think this is absurd. I would too if I hadn't felt my face tingling because of an invisible gas that came out of inside a body that should have been cold. Days later, Leo disappeared, not literally, but was transferred to another state, according to what they said, for technical staff adjustment. They didn't even warn him in advance. I tried to call, send messages. Once he responded with audio, 30 seconds. I only understood the first sentence. Don't open anything anymore. Pressurized stuff is coming. After that, never again. I know what you must be thinking. That this all seems exaggerated, or that I'm too traumatized to separate fact from sensation. But then explain to me why the reports from this case disappeared from the system. Why the toxicological exams came back inconclusive on all samples. And why was room 2 locked with a padlock from general coordination, when it has its own ventilation and physical isolation? Because it wasn't just to change the exhaust. I saw people entering with black briefcases, dark navy lab coats, badges turned inward, and I saw the body being taken without protocol, without signature, without surveillance. We take care of the dead like people organizing papers, but sometimes a body comes that seems delivered with anger, as if it had been returned, a body that stores something that not even it could handle. And look, I'm not telling you this to sound like a horror story. I'm telling you because there's more coming, more trucks, more cargo that isn't cargo, more people being used without knowing. And if you work with autopsies, if one day you touch a body that seems too hot, that doesn't stink, that has a swollen belly, don't puncture, don't open, don't try to relieve the gas, because what comes out doesn't go back. And it's not just what comes out of the body, it's what enters you. Today I live alone, never went back to the medical examiner's building. My things are stored in a warehouse, and I sleep with the window open, even with mosquitoes, even with street noise, because no matter what I do, the air from room 2 still lives in my memory. And every time I hear that muffled crack, every time I smell burned hair from nowhere, I remember the phrase I said when Jonas fell to the floor. It was like the stomach wanted to escape through the mouth. But now I think his stomach wasn't trying to escape. It was just delivering what was put inside. If you listened this far, open the window, breathe deeply, and remember that not every body is just a body. Sometimes it's a container, and sometimes it leaks. What I saw in that shift wasn't written on the chart or in the medical record. It was sewn into the skin, into the actual tissue. And with my own name getting close to that thing, I almost ended up on the other side of the gurney. If you're hearing this, it's because I recorded it in secret, and because maybe, even though I can't prove it, I need someone to know what they did to that woman. To me too. I worked in the pathological anatomy department of University Hospital here in Phoenix, not by choice. I was a nursing technician recently transferred from the ICU after I reported some practices that I won't get into here. Because compared to what I found in that body 812R, that was child's play. And it was on a Monday, one of those muggy hospital days reeking of formaldehyde and peeling paint. It wasn't even my regular shift. They called me last minute because a body had arrived directly from the emergency department, with isolation and immediate analysis orders, no relatives, no visitors, no secure identification. Just a name on paper, Rebecca Lynn, 33 years old. When I went to get the body, it came in a closed bag, but with the surgical field partially open. It seemed like someone had tried to examine it and given up or hidden something. And that's when I saw it. In the middle of her chest, on the left side, there was a kind of surgical zipper, but it wasn't a real zipper. It was as if the skin itself had been adapted, cut, and then joined by internal stitches, with suturing so fine it seemed made with embroidery thread, those old ones, like burnt nylon thread. And worse, right above this zipper sewn into the tissue, there was a name embroidered, not on a tag, on the body itself, stitch by stitch. It said Rebecca L. That already messed with my head, because it's not common to do that. There's no such thing as a uniform incorporated into a patient's skin. There's no explanation. And when I tried to loosen it, pull the edge, the suturing was inside. It was a graft, part of the tissue. And then came the feeling that I wasn't facing a victim, I was facing a product. I asked for support from another technician because I wanted to fill out the report correctly, but nobody wanted to get involved. The order was just to isolate and register. But I had seen Rebecca before, the real one. She had been intubated months ago after a severe reaction to medications. Different patient, different face, different body. And this wasn't the woman who was there. I asked them to check the dental arch because something didn't match, not even the wisdom tooth. And the other Rebecca had that as a registered mark in her medical record. And as if that wasn't enough, all the fingerprints were scraped off. All 10. But there was something worse. On the right side of the abdomen, near the hip, there was pigmentation on the skin. It wasn't a tattoo. It was like a mark made with contrast ink, the type used in clandestine surgeries or experimental clinics. It was a sequence of letters and numbers almost invisible. RL4B, Series B12. That's when everything inside me went cold. That woman wasn't there by mistake. She had been used in a way that no one should be, and someone was signing that on her. The next day, before the shift started, there was a sheet in my locker, folded and stapled, no identification. Inside, a Polaroid photo. The image was raw, showing a young woman tied to a gurney. and I recognized the same lateral cut, the suturing, the skin without reaction, and in the corner of the image written by hand with a blue pen. Order confirmed, RL, Series 4B. It was like I had been hit in the head. I no longer knew if that was a body, a warning, or a threat. I took the paper straight to the department head. I said I needed to investigate, that the medical record was wrong, that the patient's identity was false. They listened to me for 5 minutes, wrote something on paper, and by the end of the week I was transferred to the orthopedics department without explanation. They said it was internal rotation, but everyone knew that nobody was rotated there without reason. And my reason was clear. I said what nobody says. The following week, someone rang my doorbell and left a cardboard box at the gate. No name, no sender. Inside there were only 3 things. A surgical button, those zipper ones used in emergency cuts, but this one still had something stuck to it. It looked like living flesh, as if it had been ripped off hastily. An ID badge with my name, but with a position I never held, technical assistant RL line, and an unsigned note that said, "Who wears the name wears the silence. Do you want to be naked?" I cried. It wasn't from fear, it was from anger. Anger at knowing that the hospital knew. Anger at realizing that name Rebecca L. wasn't just from one patient. It was from a series, a sequence, a production line, that they weren't dealing with victims, but with raw material. And maybe I had become the next one. I didn't continue there. I left, sold what I could, left Arizona. I'm recording this in another city with another name so that someone, anyone, can hear. Because that body with the embroidered name and skin suturing wasn't a corpse, it was a message. A message for those who insist on opening where they were told to close. A message for those who still think silence protects. And before you turn this off, pay attention to this. The badge they left for me was brand new, never used, but the zipper button was still warm. After that, I started walking looking over my shoulders. Never wore hospital uniforms again. I tore up my old documents, deleted everything I had on my phone about that shift. But even so, I knew I had gone too far, because there's a difference between knowing about a medical error and seeing a body transformed into a prototype. And there in that story, there wasn't just error. There was intention, there was a project, and there were people behind it. In the following days, I started putting together everything I remembered from that shift. Date, body code, who signed the entry. But that's when things got worse, because when I went to look for the physical report of body 812R's entry, it no longer existed in the system. Gone. And the most absurd thing, the name Rebecca Lynn was replaced by a code, patient C0. No age, no origin, no cause of death, as if that woman had never existed, as if what I saw was deleted from reality. The part that breaks me to this day is this: it wasn't an error. That was planned. That woman was dressed with another person's name, sewn with another history, transformed into something else. There was one night when I had a panic attack. I started shaking, sweating cold, thinking they had entered the house. You know that feeling that someone is watching you even with everything closed, that there's an eye following you from outside. It was on that night that I got the courage to open the box again, to look properly at the zipper button. I wanted to understand, look for some mark, some symbol, but I didn't need to look much. Behind the button, engraved very small in bas-relief, there was an R followed by an L, and below what seemed to be a lot number. 004BM21. That wasn't just part of the woman's body, it was a replacement part. It was a production line. And for some reason, they had included me in the process, or wanted me to know how far they could go if I continued snooping. There's something I never told anyone, not at the police station, not at the hospital, not on the form they made me sign when I requested dismissal. 3 days before that shift, a colleague from the ICU had sent me a message at night. She was kind of desperate. She said a body had disappeared from the emergency department morgue before being released to the family. She said the documents were there, but the body wasn't. Just the bag with a switched tag, RL. At the time we thought it was a transport error, that they had taken it to the wrong place. But now I know it wasn't a mistake, it was collection. You know, when you work too long with what nobody wants to see, with what already arrived beyond repair, you develop a certain way of ignoring, a necessary coldness. But that suturing broke me, because that there wasn't just suturing, it was a signature. It was someone saying, "This here is now ours." I keep thinking, how many other bodies have passed through there with that mark? How many other Rebeccas exist? And how many technicians like me shut up to keep receiving their salary at the end of the month? But there's a time when the salary isn't worth the insomnia, when the uniform weighs, when the lab coat feels like an accomplice's uniform. And when the last note came, I understood it was my time to leave. It came on a crumpled sheet placed inside the car mirror. I was already in another city, another life, another name. I thought I had escaped, but the paper was there, handwritten. You saw too much, but said too little. That still saved you. There was no signature, but in the corner of the paper, a cutout identical to that embroidered on the body's chest, RL. But this time, the embroidered name was mine. I left everything, job, address, social media, even changed the way I talked. I started walking afraid of doorbells, of calls from unknown numbers. I only slept with the light on, and even then I dreamed of stitches sewn on my arm. I woke up thinking there was something stuck to my skin, and sometimes there were remains of hospital tape stuck to the pillow. I don't know where it came from. I know I can't prove everything. I know that whoever hears this might think it's exaggeration or paranoia. But if you work in a hospital, if you're a technician, assistant, student, pay attention to the embroidered name. Because some bodies arrive without any identification, but some arrive with ready-made stories, ready-made clothes, and embroidered destinies. This is the last time I talk about this. I don't want fame, I don't want reports, I don't want awareness, I want distance. But if someday someone else receives a box with a button, a badge, and a name embroidered on skin, know that you're not the first and maybe there's no way out anymore. If someday this recording is heard by someone who worked with me, you must have already suspected. And whoever didn't suspect, listen to the end, because it's not about me, it never was. I started noticing things in a place where nobody pays attention, in the final collection. Not at the time of opening, not in external marks, not in obvious exams. It's in that almost mechanical part that almost nobody wants to do. When the body has already been opened, emptied, and what remains is what drains. The collection of internal fluids, mainly those from the digestive tract. It's a stage usually done by interns or junior technicians, but I had the habit of doing it personally out of method, respect, or obsession. Call it what you want. What caught my attention for the first time was in June 2021. It was a male body, no relevant external signs, recent death, about 6 hours. Everything normal at first. But when inserting the probe and starting collection, I noticed that the last drop of fluid, a kind of denser residue, almost gelatinous, didn't mix with the rest. It fell outside the tube and hardened in the air. I thought it was some medication interference or food contamination. But when I positioned it under ultraviolet light, the material emitted a greenish glow, and inside the substance, a number appeared as if it had been printed from within. 6 digits, 18419. At the time I thought it was coincidence, but repetition came 2 days later. Woman, 42 years old, same situation, dark fluid, last viscous drip, and there was the same number, same glow, same pattern. On the third time, the penny dropped. It wasn't a failure, it was a sign. And nobody ever looks at the last drop, because nobody wants to be there longer than necessary. I started taking notes. I wrote down name, age, medical examiner's file, collection time, and most importantly, the hospital of origin. In 2 weeks, I noticed the pattern. All bodies with the number 18419 had a history of hospitalization at San Antonio General Hospital between March and August 2017. The pattern was so precise it hurt. All had undergone surgical procedures, generally invasive but common. And there was something even more specific, the presence of a name in anesthesia reports, a name that didn't appear in front files, only in copies of internal memos. Project Nephis, Biofluid Department. I never heard this name during my training, not in conferences, not in on-call shifts. When you work in this field, you start to notice what's official and what's hidden with a pretty label. Project is the type of word that serves everything, including erasing what you don't want to explain. I decided to go to the university campus, where I myself had taught for a while. There I found Professor Martinez, who had been clinical research coordinator in 2017. He was experienced, respected, and had worked with some of the names that appeared in the reports. I asked directly, "What is Nephis?" He froze, tried to laugh, said it was old stuff that I had probably confused with an enzyme study. He lied, and I knew it. That night when I got home, there was an email in my personal account, hidden address, blank subject, a single attachment, 18419.mp4. I've seen a lot of things, but this video was a recording from an operating room. The patient intubated, monitor connected, eyes still moving. One of the surgeons with a standard mask and lab coats without badges approaches the camera and speaks firmly. "Reapply the fluid, minimum drip. We don't want to burn the number again." Someone obeys. A syringe comes into scene, pours a transparent substance through a tube connected to the vein. The patient's skin reacts slowly, and there in the fold of the abdomen, the same number begins to form, like an internal scar before the cut itself. I paused, rewound, watched 7 times. On the last one I vomited. It was marking. They were printing numbers inside the body. But what I didn't understand until today is why. It wasn't tracking. It wasn't DNA identification. It wasn't a known technique. The number didn't appear in conventional exams. Only in that last drop where nobody wants to look. I decided to do a test. The following week, during the dawn shift, I went to the collection room and prepared the same kit used for gastric fluid, but I used it on myself. I cut my fingertip with a surgical scalpel, stopped the bleeding. Then I collected the secretion with a sterile cotton swab, dilution on slide, contrasting with fluorescent solution, and waited. After 3 minutes, the same substance began to appear, more pasty, less voluminous, but identical. And when I put it under the light, there it was, 18419 in my own body, in my own drop. I had been marked. The doubt destroyed me. I never had surgery at that hospital, never participated in experimental research, but then I remembered. In 2017, I had a severe bacterial intestinal infection. I spent a week hospitalized. I had to sign a term for a non-invasive procedure done by a technical cooperation group from the university. I signed without reading. Now it doesn't matter anymore, because if you're hearing this, it's because I didn't come back from the shift on the 11th, or because something prevented me from coming back. I recorded this audio at 4:47 in the morning, right after the test with my own sample. I went to the car, started it, but couldn't get out of the parking space. Something in the air wouldn't let me, as if it knew I had discovered, as if it had already accepted that I was also part of the project. Note attached to the case. Dr. Marcus Williams did not return to the Harris County Medical Examiner's office after the dawn shift on September 11th, 2021. His car was found hours later, with the engine running and doors locked on a dirt road near the University of Texas San Antonio campus. No sign of break-in, no external marks on the vehicle. The personal computer was formatted days later by remote access. The recording you heard was recovered from a non-indexed backup on the external hard drive from his residence. The number 18419 is not in any official medical database, but what really bothers is that in the last 3 autopsies done during Dr. Williams' shift, the reports were incomplete because the last drop was missing, and nobody could explain why. This is one of those stories that nobody shouts about, but everyone leaves quietly, because deep down we know that certain things don't need permission to happen. They just need an available body, and yours might already be marked. I've been through difficult things inside the medical examiner's office. I've handled bodies shredded by agricultural machinery. I've received burned bones at the bottom of black bags, but what almost made me collapse was a clean body, washed, cataloged. It was the second week of my internship in forensic pathology, there at Denver General Hospital, and I had just been assigned to the general autopsy block. It was a shift nobody wanted to take. People who died alone, without documents, without family. And this patient, number 27, file generated at 3:08 in the morning, was exactly that. A man without identification, approximately 36 years old, delivered by the Ward 11 team, cause of death. Sudden cardiorespiratory arrest in ambulatory context. But he arrived fresh, not in the figurative sense. I mean physiologically fresh. Skin color still pink, tonality in mucous membranes, no apparent rigidity. At first, I thought he died very recently, maybe minutes before delivery. But then I made the first cut, and I swear on everything that's dearest to me, I vomited with the mask on my face because it bled. It didn't bleed like residual blood. It didn't bleed like someone who still has some active impulse. Live blood came out, hot, with capillary burst pulsation. At the moment, I stepped back from the table. One of the technicians came with the most disdainful attitude in the world, looked at the cut, saw the reaction, and said just this: "Don't be scared, Doc." This one came straight from Ward 11. That way of speaking like someone who already knew everything. I kept that in my head, went back to the table, started following protocol. But the more I opened, the less sense it made. The liver had marks from previous cuts, cauterization done with electrosurgical scalpel, operating room stuff. But the file didn't mention any surgery. There was blood in movement in the hepatic veins. The stomach with gastric juice still active, and what destroyed me completely was the eye. The right eyeball presented lacrimal residues formed in the last 10 minutes. In other words, either this man cried before dying or he was conscious during something. That wasn't a delivered body, it was an interrupted body. I went back to the technician's room, asked to see the delivery protocol. They avoided my gaze. One of them spoke without taking his eyes off the floor. "There's no protocol. Came from the W, just close it up." W for what? W for last stop. Later I found out this was an internal code. When it came from there, the order was don't touch, just conclude, just sign. But as a student, I needed to understand. I went after it, entered the system trying to pull the file. 3 minutes later, the system crashed. I thought it was coincidence. I tried again later. Patient 27's file no longer existed. I looked for the disposal closet. An older technician, looking tired and uninterested, gave me a sealed box saying, "This is what's left, standard disposal." Inside the box were 3 items: a molar still with gum, a dried left eye with marking made with pen 27A, and an envelope with thick paper. On it was written, "Do not open. Dispose with soft parts 2784C." That wasn't disposal. It was a kit, a disassembly kit, as if it were normal to receive separate human parts, labeled, packaged with technical disposal seal. The autopsy file I had made was deleted the next morning. The body, already sutured, was taken without proper documentation. And the strangest thing, the entire autopsy room was washed with a chemical product so strong that I had headaches for 3 days. They changed the wall aprons, replaced the surgical tray materials, and then called me for a psychological evaluation. The justification was that I had demonstrated emotional instability during the procedure. One of the security guards stopped me in the hallway and spoke very directly. "Doc, you're not the first to think you saw something wrong in Ward 11, but whoever insists doesn't stay." I asked what ward that was. He pretended not to hear, just kept walking. I found out from a cleaning lady that Ward 11 was where years ago the experimental surgery center operated. Officially, it was deactivated due to lack of funding, but the structure still exists and people come and go from there. But nobody from inside the hospital. They're third parties. People with badges that aren't in the system. I saw this with my own eyes. One night, I infiltrated through the side access. I managed to see through a door crack a gurney being pulled hastily, covered with plastic sheets, no companion, nothing, just a figure pulling. A tall man, lab coat, no logo. I didn't have the courage to enter, but what convinced me that all this was bigger than I could handle was the image. When I left the hospital, months later, I received an anonymous email with no text, just an attached image. It was a photo of the gurney, the same one on which I had performed the procedure. But on it, under blue light, you could clearly see a tag stuck between the body's lips. The image was in infrared UV type. On the tag was written, "Experimental patient 27, too reactive, dispose before filing." In other words, he still had response. He still reacted. And even so, he was dismantled with scalpels, without anesthesia, without documentation, without chance. The worst of all is that by protocol, I was the one who finalized the investigation conclusion file. I was the one who sutured. I was the one who gave the stitches. Not a week goes by that I don't receive another message without subject, without sender, just one line. Your name is on patient 28's file. I don't want to know who 28 is, but I know that whoever it is will end up the same way. And it might be that the next suturing will be on me. She had no name. Just that should have been enough to file differently, but it wasn't. They gave her a code, put her on a file without fingerprints, without identity, and sent her to my room as if she were just another one. When I first entered that place, the institute I mean, they told me we just needed to learn to maintain distance. That was the first thing the chief said. You're going to see every absurdity, but don't get attached. I managed at first, even with the most difficult cases. There was a boy who fell from a scaffold, an elderly woman who was forgotten in her own backyard for days. Things that hurt, yes, but you harden your chest, learn to breathe deeply and continue. But with her, it didn't work. She had no name, no certain age, but seemed to be around 6 or 7 years old. The body came wrapped in a thermal blanket, those silver ones, all folded as if someone had tried to care. But she had no earrings, no bracelet, nothing that said who she was, not even an apparent injury. She just didn't have a single tooth in her mouth, not one. I thought it was some kind of disease, maybe a rare condition. But when I opened her mouth, I found neither roots, no bleeding, no cut, no hematoma on the gums. The jaw bones were smooth, as if the teeth had been deactivated, as if they had never been there. I froze there. It was my first case alone. My supervisor was in a hearing, and I followed protocol as best I could. I noted everything, took photos, recorded each absence, each gap in her body, and there were many. The fingerprints didn't exist. The skin on her fingers had a different texture, as if it had been polished with some kind of substance. I spent almost 20 minutes trying to scan, thinking it was equipment failure, but the device didn't register an error. It just didn't read anything. Then came the ophthalmological exam. Her eyes were closed, but not as you normally see in victims like this. It was involuntary tension. I needed a special instrument to open the eyelids, and when I managed to, I noticed something slippery. It was as if there was a second membrane there between the eyeball and the eyelid, a type of transparent, gelatinous layer stuck like a film. Not even an ophthalmologist would have a ready explanation for that. I almost stopped there. I swear I almost did, but I didn't want to fail on my first complete report. I breathed deeply and went to analyze the ear canals. On the left side, everything normal, but on the right, when I introduced the forceps, I felt resistance, as if something was tensioning inside there. That's when I saw the wire. A blue wire, almost invisible, wound like a tiny spool inside the ear canal. When I tried to pull it, it retracted by itself. I was still holding the forceps, but it shrank inward as if it had a life of its own and disappeared. I didn't say anything that day. I recorded what I could. I wrote unidentified material on the chart. But that wasn't a common wire. When it was time to open the abdominal cavity, I wasn't sure I wanted to continue, but I went ahead. I made the standard cut. The organs were all there, except for the stomach contents. Or rather, the contents were there, but it was something I'd never seen. It looked like gelatin, transparent, slightly pulsating. Yes, pulsating. When the scalpel touched it, the substance trembled like a jellyfish, but didn't leave its place. There was also no odor, neither the smell of decomposition nor anything that indicated time of death. It was as if that body was on pause, as if it had been brought directly from a chamber isolated from time. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm measuring each word. I noted everything, took photos. One of them, in fact, came out all white, as if the flash had blown out, but the camera was digital. There was no way to make that kind of mistake. At the time, I thought it was a defect. I tried to resend it to the medical examiner's database. The system froze. Not only froze, but closed by itself. This had never happened, never. 2 days later, when I came back to check her case, the body was no longer in the chamber. Gone. I went to administration, checked the record book, asked to see the security cameras. There was no entry or exit, no patrol car listed for that day, no girl with thermal blanket. The ambulance prefix that appeared on the form was listed as decommissioned in 2021. I went to the closet to get the printed copy of the white photo. I myself had left it there to reprint later. And when I opened the folder, it had a huge X made with black marker, crossing the entire image. I started asking questions. Nobody remembered the body, not the night security guard, not the technician who shared the room with me, not the driver who supposedly brought her. That's when I opened my glove drawer and found that. A tooth. A single clean baby tooth, with a microfissure that formed the number 0. I held that thing in my palm for so long that my nails marked my skin. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just stood there looking, because that was a beginning. And if it was a beginning, what would number 1 be? Did I take the tooth with me? I shouldn't have, I know, but nobody else remembered her. The chart no longer existed in the system. The body had disappeared, and the only thing left besides the memory hammering in my head was that, a baby tooth with an engraved number. 0. Not drawn, engraved, as if it had been carved millimetrically, with surgical precision, from within the structure itself. As if that had already been born that way. In the following days, I started dreaming about her image, not as she was on the table, but as if she were looking at me from the room door, standing, silent, with the blanket still covering her shoulders and her mouth empty. It was always the same silence. On the 5th day, my supervisor called me, said she needed to talk about my behavior. She claimed I was unstable, that I had started forgetting protocols, that one of my reports had been returned with error marks, something that had never happened before. That's when I learned that the internal control system showed a history of access to the file of a body that was not officially registered. The access had been made with my password 3 times during the dawn hours, but I wasn't in the system those dawns. Or was I? I'm not sure of anything anymore. From that point on, the days started to get mixed up. I was removed for unjustified emotional issues. I signed the term without understanding what I was doing and took the tooth with me. I kept it inside a ring box, small, lined with blue fabric, almost the same shade as that wire I saw inside her ear. almost identical. But then, a week after my leave, I received a call, restricted number, male voice, paused, asking if I was the doctor who took care of the toothless girl case. Nobody could know that. I didn't answer, the call dropped, but at night, when I went to check the box, the tooth was no longer there. In its place there was another one, a new tooth, same format, same size, but the number was 1. That's when I knew I had been part of a sequence. Someone or something was testing. I don't know if it's an experiment, I don't know if it's human, I don't know if it's a warning, but I'm almost certain that girl wasn't brought to be examined. She was returned. Like an envelope that the sender didn't want to receive. Like something that the world out there tried to push back inside ours. And we opened it. I thought about turning in the teeth, about telling someone everything, but who would believe? There's no file, no body, the photos disappeared. Even my own evaluation of the day appears as incomplete in the system. In the last week, before recording this audio, I started hearing sounds, not voices, sounds. Like a buzz inside the wall, low, intermittent, always when night falls, always coming from the side of the box where there are now 2 teeth. I don't even know if I'm recording this for someone to hear. Maybe I just need to say it out loud, say that what I saw wasn't a breakdown, wasn't exaggeration or old trauma. It was real. The mouth without teeth, the blue wire, the polished skin, the living substance in the stomach, the number. I don't know who's keeping the rest, but if someone out there, whoever it is, finds another body like this, look at the teeth. Even if they seem normal, even if only one is missing, check. Count. If it's number 2, don't look for me, because I don't want to know anymore. If there's another number on that next tooth, I don't want to be here to see it. It was an IT technician who made me realize I wasn't losing my mind, not intentionally, anyway. He just helped me pull up the original audio that my brother had recorded, an audio that I had watched being sent myself. I was in the family group chat. I was there. I remember the notification. And yet what reached my phone was something else entirely. Another recording, same timestamp, same file, same voice, but different words. It wasn't a mistake. I know what I heard. I'm from Bakersfield, Central Valley, California. My family's always lived here. Simple life, quiet existence. And my brother Jake was a long-haul trucker. He ran routes constantly between California and Arizona, always crossing the same stretch of Interstate 29. That highway looks normal enough on the map, but there are places out there where cell service doesn't last 10 seconds. And when the sun goes down, it becomes something else entirely. Only people who drive through there at night understand what I'm talking about. Jake had this habit of letting us know when he was running late or when he stopped at a truck stop. He'd always send voice messages because he knew Mom would worry. And on April 14th, around 5 in the afternoon, he sent a message to our group chat. It went like this: running late. Hit some heavy rain in the pass, but I'm heading down now. I'll be there early tomorrow morning. But that's not what I heard. My phone buzzed and I clicked play almost immediately. What came out was, "We'll see each other on the other side." I said what and played it again. Same tone, same voice, just a dry, cold phrase with no context whatsoever. At first I thought he was joking, you know. Or maybe he sent it to the wrong group, but it made no sense. Then 3 hours passed. The house phone rang. Mom answered. It was the highway patrol. They told us Jake's truck had rolled over on a curve after a stretch of heavy fog. He didn't survive. They identified him by his documents and his wedding ring. They said the truck caught fire. I can't explain what it's like to be in shock and remember a strange audio message in the middle of all that chaos. Your brain just locks up. But that same night, around 2 in the morning, I opened my phone again and went to listen to the audio, just to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. It was the same thing. We'll see each other on the other side. Only now, listening to it again, it seemed even more definitive, more direct, like it hadn't been a mistake, like he'd said it on purpose. The next day we went to collect his belongings. They brought his phone along. It was a bit scorched on the outside, but it still worked. And that's when things started getting unbearable. I asked for help from someone I knew who worked in it. He's one of those guys who builds servers at home, always messing with backups and that kind of stuff. I told him, pull up the original audio he recorded, see if you can get it. The original recording file said exactly what Jake had told me at the beginning. Running late. Hit some heavy rain in the pass, but I'm heading down now. I'll be there early tomorrow morning. Everything was normal, no abnormalities whatsoever. But then he pulled up the transmission history. The carrier's server showed that was the file that had been sent to me. So why did I receive something else? That's the most disturbing part. The audio that reached my phone had the same metadata, same timestamp, same file size, even the same file name. But it was different content. The technician even tried to theorize that it could have been a synchronization error, some bug between servers, but he himself said he'd never seen anything like it. 2 audios with identical metadata, but different content. By then, I wasn't sleeping properly anymore. We held the funeral as best we could. My brother was only 35 years old. Mom hadn't spoken a word since the day of the phone call. 3 days later, at 3:12 in the morning, I woke up to a notification on my phone. It was a voice message from his number. I swear on everything holy. It was the same number. I'd already deleted it from my contacts, but I recognized it immediately. It just showed up as an unknown number. I hit play, trembling. The phrase was short. Don't take the route on the 18th. Nothing more. The audio showed as already listened to before I even touched it. And the strangest part, the send date was the 18th, 3 days ahead of where we were. I was shaking all over. I stood there staring at my phone like it was going to explode. The next day, I went to the carrier store, took a screenshot of the number, showed them the notification. The woman who helped me looked in the system and said, "That number's been deactivated, sir. It's been inactive since the 15th. She said there was no portability request or anything. The number didn't exist anymore, but I had the audio saved with his voice, the same one, exactly the same. I asked them to transfer the number to me, just to have some control over the situation. The attendant tried, but the system froze. The option wasn't available anymore. It was like someone had pulled the number back, like they didn't want anything else to be delivered. I couldn't work the following days. I just waited for the 18th to arrive. And when it did, I didn't go anywhere, didn't take any highways. I stayed home locked up, my phone off, my car in the garage. That same night, it came on the radio that a trucker who was going to take the same route as my brother had suffered a fatal accident. The trucker who died that night was doing the same stretch as Jake, the same route, left at the same time, but he had no connection to us whatsoever. not to the company my brother worked for either. It was a coincidence, if that's all it was. When I heard it on the radio, I couldn't react. I didn't cry, didn't say anything, just sat on the couch and stared at the floor for over an hour. I knew that if I had gone, it could have been me. The message warned me and I obeyed, but the warning wasn't exclusive, was it? It was like someone was saying, "Not that road." It didn't matter who it was, just the stretch, just the date. From that day forward, I stopped doubting everything that seemed impossible. And that's why I'm recording this for the channel, because so far no one has given me an explanation that seems more believable than what actually happened. What I heard, what I saw. Were there more things? Yes. My brother's phone that I had with me, the one that still worked despite the damaged side from the crash, started turning off by itself. I'd leave it on the shelf, charging, and I'd hear the shutdown sound, even without anyone touching it. One of those times I looked at the screen before it went dark, and a name appeared that I'd never seen in the contact history. Final route. No number, nothing, just that. Final route. I clicked on it. It wouldn't open. It disappeared right after, never appeared again. I thought about formatting the device, deleting everything, but something held me back. I needed proof. Because every time I told this story to someone, they'd look at me with pity, like it was too much grief, weak mind, imagination. Until something simple changed that. The original audio and the one I received didn't match, and the technician proved it. That became the center of everything. I started showing the difference to people I trusted. I showed it to a cousin of mine who's a police forensics expert. He listened to both files and was visibly unsettled. He said he'd never seen the same file with the same digital hash have different content. That doesn't happen. It only happens if you manipulate it. But both were clean. No editing, no network error, there was substitution, but by something no one can trace. I started suspecting even the system, the servers, the things we trust without thinking, that a message will arrive the same way, that a deactivated number won't send anything else, that the voice of someone who's gone won't speak again. Then came the final signal. 2 weeks after that 18th date, I was trying to sleep with the phone far away, turned off, mind empty. It was almost 3 in the morning again, almost the same time as the other audio, the whole house dark, when I woke up to a sound that made me jump up. It wasn't a notification. It was the sound of a WhatsApp audio being played out loud, like someone was holding the phone in their hand right there in the living room. You know that sound when we hit play on an audio and it starts with background noise. But the phone was off on the shelf, face down. I went there trembling, short of breath, grabbed the phone, turned it on immediately, opened WhatsApp, nothing. No new messages, no audio, no recent history. But there was something different. In the received files folder, there was a new audio, no sender, no date, no origin. File name, Jake Final WAV. I hit play. It was just slow, steady breathing for about 4 seconds. And at the end, a single phrase, final route delivered. I turned off the phone and never turned it back on. I kept it in an envelope with the screenshots and backups. I still can't throw it away. I also couldn't show it to my mother. She never brought up the subject again. Lives on autopilot. I'm on autopilot too since then. Some days I still hear that first audio in my head as if it were being spoken right now. We'll see each other on the other side. It wasn't a joke, wasn't a warning just for me. And at the same time, it was. Some people believe that voices get trapped in places, that energy remains, that certain messages cross over when what's about to happen is stronger than any technology. But I don't think that's what it was. I think it was intentional. Like there was some kind of passage, yes. But this passage uses what we already have: satellites, frequency, transmission. It doesn't need lit candles or haunted places. It just needs the right moment and the right person to listen. That was the story. I don't want to convince anyone, I just want to record it. Because if someone else receives a strange message from someone who's already gone, maybe they'll remember this. Maybe they won't delete it. Maybe they'll realize that the worst thing isn't the message arriving, it's when it's not wrong. There's something I never thought I'd say with such certainty, but today I speak it without stammering. It's not the place that talks, it's the object. The phrase sounds strange, but I need you to listen to the end before you think it's made up. It's not an exaggeration. It's also not some roadside scare. It's a sequence, a pattern that shouldn't exist. I've been a trucker for almost 20 years. I've done routes south, north, driven down mountains in the rain. I've spent 3 days sleeping against truck tires. What I'm about to tell you started about 6 months ago, on a simple early morning. One of those where you just want to take a quick leak and get back in the cab before it gets cold. I was on Interstate 75 near Gainesville, Florida. I stopped at an old state-run truck stop, kind of rundown, but still operational. Anyone who drives at night knows that after 2 a.m., there are only two kinds of places open. The ones that are too good to be true, and the ones nobody wants to stop at anymore. This was the second kind. There wasn't even a light on the price sign, one burnt-out lamp in front of the diner, and that was it. But I was pressed for time. It had been over 3 hours without stopping, and I decided to risk it. The restroom was in the back, all covered in graffiti, with one of those doors you have to lift to close. I went in. It was empty, just the sound of dripping water and a huge spider near the light switch. I chose the stall at the end. The seat was dark iron, that old model, industrial. I closed the stall door and sat down. I don't usually take long, but in that moment, when silence hits, your head starts working in the wrong places. And that's when it happened for the first time. I swear by my profession that a voice came from inside the toilet, weak but clear. It said, "You took your time, but you came. Just the way you are here, no more, no less." No anger, no rush. It was a somewhat rough voice, muffled, like it was coming from behind some wall, but it echoed right beneath me. I literally froze. I stayed there for a good few seconds, not knowing whether to get up or stay put. I tried to laugh to myself, like my mind was playing a trick on me. I got up, wiped quickly, went to flush, and headed straight to the diesel pump. I finished fueling with my heart racing, like someone was watching from behind the rearview mirror. I tried to forget it, I swear. I convinced myself it was fatigue, paranoia from someone who hadn't slept right in days. But then, 2 weeks later, it happened again. This time I was in Ocala, Central Florida. Different route, different state, but the same type of stop. Old truck stop, kind of abandoned, dim lighting, restroom in the back. The moment I saw the stall with the same iron toilet, kind of oval, all worn down, I already felt a knot in my stomach. But what could I do? I was pressed again. I went in, locked myself in, sat down. The sink faucet was dripping, there was a musty smell, and then, "You took your time, but you came." exactly the same. Exactly the same, man. If you're listening to me now and thinking I'm making this up, I understand, because up until then I didn't want to believe it either. But there, that second time, fear turned into curiosity. The voice wasn't a threat. It was just a statement, like it was waiting for me, like it knew that eventually I'd sit there again. I stayed still, looking at the toilet. I got closer slowly, like I was going to see someone hiding in there, but there was nothing, no bug, no hidden speaker, no fake grating. That night I took out my logbook and wrote down everything. The model, the date, the time, the truck stop name, even drew the flush handle. I was decided. I was going to find out what that was. The third time I was already expecting it. It happened in Wildwood, Florida. Same thing. Dark truck stop, grimy restroom, iron toilet. But now I went in with my phone in my pocket, camera on, microphone activated. I sat down, stayed quiet. Nothing. 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2. I was already thinking the event was going to fail. But then, quietly, exactly the same. You took your time, but you came. I was prepared. I came out filming everything. I went in front of the toilet, shined my flashlight, threw paper, even tested if it wasn't the sound of the plumbing, but it wasn't. The voice came from inside, from somewhere deep. It didn't seem like a trick, didn't seem like interference. When I got back to the truck, my face was white. I replayed the audio about 10 times. I always heard the same thing in the same tone. Only the microphone didn't pick up anything. There was no recording of the voice. There was ambient sound, breathing, even the dripping noise. But the phrase wasn't there. That gave me a chill down my spine that didn't go away even with coffee. I became obsessed. I started researching, took photos of the fixture, looked up the brand. It was an old national company called Titan Sanitary, which closed in the 90s. I started pulling data like I was a detective. I found a PDF note from Miami-Dade County from 1992, talking about the closure of the factory after an internal accident. An employee died, buried by molten mold plates on the foundry line of the sanitary division. The exact line that produced that model I had used in the 3 stops. The employee's name wasn't disclosed. They said the mold melted with him inside, and no one could open it again without damaging the equipment. Management preferred to seal the mold and dump it in a disposal area. But according to an older employee, I managed to locate on a forum. Some pieces had already been delivered. These pieces are the toilets that are still out there in old stops, places nobody wants to renovate. And there are people who have been through this too. I found an old trucker forum from the 2000s. There was a thread titled Restroom That Talks. A trucker wrote, "Every time I stop on the Ocala Highway, I hear the same thing in the same tone. I stay quiet because I think if I ever respond, things will change." Another one replied with something that made me clench my jaw. "You took your time, but you came right." Well, it wasn't you I wanted. Then I closed everything, deleted the tabs, sat there staring at the darkness of the cab and asked myself, how many others heard it and responded? After that, I changed my way of driving. It might seem like paranoia, but I started avoiding any truck stop that had old restrooms, especially those with iron seats or that were in the back without windows. There was one early morning in Gainesville when I preferred to hold it until it hurt. And look, anyone who drives heavy loads for hours and hours knows what that kind of pressure is like. But even so, I held it, because I was already starting to think that if I sat down one more time, something was going to change. But the road demands payment. Eventually, we find ourselves with no choice. That was last month. It was a long route, Central Florida to the Alabama border. My tank was almost empty, and the GPS showed me a truck stop I'd never used, wasn't even on the main maps. Weird name, kind of faded, but it seemed open. The moment I pulled up, I already felt I shouldn't. There was only one cold light, a hooded attendant who didn't even look at me, and the convenience store sign half melted from the rain. I went to the restroom, and before I even opened the door, I already knew. It was the same type. Iron door with a chain, old graffiti, sour stench coming from inside. I tried to turn back, I swear, but my body wouldn't obey anymore. I opened the stall door. There it was, the gray oval iron toilet, molded with the same wear marks, the same scratches. I went in, locked up, sat down, closed my eyes, and then it came for the fourth time. You took your time, but you came. But it wasn't just that, there was more. After the phrase, the sound stopped. Total silence. And then, like someone was pulling air from inside the pipe, came a second phrase. Only you're missing now. I got up immediately, flushed, opened the stall door with my pants still unbuttoned, came out stumbling, actually running, with the restroom door still banging behind me. I went back to the truck with my hands shaking. I had to wait about 10 minutes to be able to turn the key, but the worst was still to come. 2 days later at home, I was trying to forget, but then I dreamed. I was walking down a dark hallway with cracked tiles on the walls and stall doors lined up on both sides. Each door had a toilet mark, old, molded, all with the lid up. And from inside each one came a sound. It wasn't a voice. It was heavy breathing, like something was waiting. At the back of the last stall there was a mirror. And when I looked at it, I didn't see my face. I saw the mold, the molten plate from Titan Sanitary with suction marks, and in the center what looked like a face trapped in the form, melted into the iron. Blurred eyes, mouth half open. I woke up with my breathing stuck, tasting rust in my mouth. Since then, I don't go into roadside restrooms alone anymore. When I can, I wait for another driver, keep company, make conversation, doesn't matter. I just need to make sure there's someone else there besides me. But even so, sometimes when I sit down, I'm waiting for the phrase, not because I want to hear it, but because I know that if one day it doesn't come, it's because it already found another one. You know what really scares me? It's not the voice, it's not the factory story, it's not even the mold with the face. It's the fact that all this repeats with the same object. It's not the place, it's the model. And nobody notices this because nobody sits paying attention to an old toilet. But I'm here to say, pay attention. If you hear something, don't respond, because whoever responds enters the pattern, and the pattern wants to continue. That was my story. Maybe someone out there has been through something similar. If you have, comment. But be careful what you respond to. Not everything that talks to you is asking a question. Sometimes it's just marking who has already accepted. And then it's a matter of time. I had forgotten the taste of my wife's cooking. Not out of bad will, it's just that it had been 22 days on the road, eating at truck stops, sleeping in rest area parking lots, and taking bucket showers. All I could think about was getting home and sitting in the porch chair next to her, smelling that scent that only her kitchen had. But when I turned onto the dirt road in the rural area of Bakersfield, near Interstate 99, I didn't recognize the place. The grass was high, the fence fallen. The garage entrance had old tire marks, like nobody had been there in a long time. At first I thought she had traveled at the last minute or gotten sick. I don't know. But when I opened the gate with my key, the gate still turned heavy like before. Only the house was dead. I thought she went out and forgot to clean. But the smell was different. It was stuffy, moldy, almost sick. I went in calling softly, silence, went straight to the bedroom. The bed was the way we left it, only all dusty. The sheets stiff from being in the same place for so long. The pot was still on the stove, rice dried up, stuck to the bottom. The water from the tank was gone. The pipes just made wind sounds. The closet had her clothes, but the drawers were empty of documents. That's when a shout made me turn around. "You still have the key." It was Jim, the neighbor from across the street. He was standing at his gate with the face of someone who'd seen a ghost. City Hall came by here and said nobody lived there anymore since the accident. I froze. What accident? He closed his face, stuttered, said he was just repeating what he heard, that nobody knew for sure, and went back inside without saying goodbye. I stood there feeling the house stare at me. I went to the bathroom. There was her toothbrush, old soap, a stained towel still on the hook, everything there. But at the same time, it seemed like a set of something that ended and nobody had the courage to dismantle. That night I slept in a corner of the mattress with the door locked. In the early morning, I woke up to a noise on the roof. Cat, maybe. But I swear I saw like someone was walking slowly, like they were waiting for me to open my mouth to ask something. The next day I went to the city hospital, asked to see if she had been admitted in the last few weeks. "What's her full name?" the girl asked. I told her. She typed, waited. "Are you sure it's here in the city? Because there's no record with that name, no treatment, nothing." I left cold, went straight to the registry office. There too, nothing, no certificate, no social security number, nothing under her name, like she had evaporated. I went to the health clinic, same thing. She was never treated here. But the lady who gave her vaccines, geez, the woman pretended she didn't remember. She said there were a lot of people, that it wasn't possible to keep track of everyone. When I got back home, I decided to look for her documents. Nothing. The little box where we kept everything was there, but it only had my old papers. Her driver's license was gone. Social security card too, health insurance card, bank card, even that little notebook from the fabric store where she wrote down everything. It all disappeared. All that was left was her smell on the pillow and a little bottle of perfume used halfway. I went to knock on the back neighbor's door, Wilson. He looked through the window, pretended he didn't see me. I called louder. He came out, closed the window slowly, and told me with the coldest face I'd ever seen, "You should leave here again. That's not for messing with." I walked home. There was a weight on the floor, on the furniture, on the wall. I started asking myself if I had forgotten something, if I hit my head on the road, if I dreamed she existed and believed it for years. But then I found her engagement ring in the little sugar pot, where she hid things so nobody would see. And nobody dreams that that's real. On the third day, I stopped trying to understand, not because I accepted it, but because I realized that every time I said her name, it was like I was saying something forbidden. At the supermarket, I asked about her. She was known there, did the house shopping. The cashier girl looked at me strange. said she'd never seen her. And when I insisted, the manager came, politely asked me not to cause confusion. At the pharmacy, the same thing. At the bakery, the baker changed the subject and talked about the weather. Nobody wanted to talk about my wife. It was like she had never stepped foot there. I went to the gas station where I used to fuel up before trips. I showed her picture on my phone. It was a selfie of us from when we fixed the fence together. The attendant looked and answered, "Don't know her," but his eyes were shaking. I tried calling her brother, who lived 2 cities away. Number didn't exist, social media deleted. I looked for her on her niece's profile, but it seemed like she had never posted a photo with her aunt. It was like someone had cleaned her trail, not just from here, but from everywhere. I went back home and started walking through the rooms. Every corner, the crochet cloth on the tank, the red ribbon she used to tie her hair, the worn-out slippers under the bed, it was all there. But at the same time, she wasn't anywhere. I went to City Hall, tried to ask for some kind of record, something that would explain this accident the neighbor mentioned. The attendant pulled some files, messed with the archives, and asked me, "What occurrence exactly do you want to know about, sir?" "About the accident that happened here, that erased my wife's name." He looked at me like I had told him about a made-up story. In the system, the last thing on record for this address is an abandonment notification. House without resident. That was 4 months ago. 4 months, I left on a trip 22 days ago. Well, but according to what we have here, this house has been officially empty for longer. I left there not knowing if I was in the right time, like I had arrived after the end. That night, I sat on the living room floor with the light off. I stayed listening to the silence of the house and asked myself, could it be that I didn't see some sign before? Could it be that she tried to warn me? Could it be that something happened and nobody wanted to tell me? But the worst of all is that part of me started thinking that maybe she hadn't really existed. Not completely. Maybe I created a whole life just to have someone to come back to. It was the next day that the truck stop owner saw me around there asking if I needed anything. I explained just the basics. He let me sleep in a little room in the back without charging. He offered me a mechanic job he needed, and that's where I am now. On the wall, there's an outlet that sparks, a bare wire. I lie down with the noise of the convenience store freezer generator, and when I wake up sometimes, I still think I'm going to see her at the door calling me for lunch. But then the hit comes, the same every day. Because the worst thing wasn't her going away. The worst thing is that nobody even remembers she existed. Not the city, not the neighbors, not the government, just me, and I don't know for how long. Today, sometimes, when the truck stop people close everything and leave, I stay leaning against the wall, looking at the darkness, and I think, if it really was an accident, where's the body? Where's the story? Where's the rest of me? Because I came back home, but the house was no longer mine. And now I'm here living in a world that made a point of erasing my life. When nobody remembers you, it's like dying slowly, but when nobody remembers your family, it's worse. It's like only you were left behind. I don't know what you would do in my place, but if you ever arrive at a place to pick up a load and the gate is already open, leave, turn around. Don't wait for anyone to call you, just go away. This happened to me in East Los Angeles, in the industrial zone. It wasn't that long ago, and I almost didn't make it out in one piece. The freight came through a transport company I'd worked with before. It had proper documentation, tracking, even a signed loading order. Everything looked right, at least on paper. The cargo was light, some pallets of electronics, quick stuff. The address was for a warehouse that, according to the system, had just been registered. I even thought it was good. New warehouses are usually organized, you know. But this one wasn't. I arrived in the late afternoon. The street was emptier than it should have been for that time. There was no sign, but the number matched what was on the order, and the gate, as I said, was already ajar. I drove in slowly with the headlights on, as usual. Right away, I saw two guys inside. Dark polo shirts, ID badges hanging. One of them waved at me like he already knew it was me. He spoke directly. "It's here all right. Just pull up and we'll do an inspection before releasing the cargo." That gave me a knot in my stomach, because inspection for drivers is usually invoice checking, seal checking, bureaucratic stuff. But the way he said it was too dry, like I had to go through some screening, something wrong. Even so, I pulled up. Maybe it was just my paranoia. I got out of the truck and went to the indicated spot. There was no forklift running, no other employees, no sign of electronics. The space was large but empty, a strange echo and a weird smell in the air strong, like expired chemicals. On the left side, some boxes stacked on the floor. None with logos, no seals. Old cardboard, dented. I saw some colored tape, but nothing that said what it was. That's when I really started to suspect, and when the fear started getting louder than the doubt. I took a walk pretending to inspect the truck from the outside, that stalling we do to buy time. The truth is, I was trying to observe better without calling attention. And there, by the door, I stuck my hand in my phone and activated the camera. I put it in my shirt pocket with the lens kind of sticking out. It recorded about 6 minutes, I think. And in the middle of that, 2 more guys arrived. One of them spoke quietly with the first ones. "Will there be time before the shift?" the other answered. "If it goes wrong, we'll fix the invoice later, but everything has to go together in the convoy." The moment I heard that, I understood. That place wasn't a company at all, it was a front. And I wasn't a driver, I was a witness. I thought about walking away, pretending I forgot some document on the dashboard. But before I could move, one of the guys pointed at my pocket. "What's that?" The tension in the air changed, dried up, became sharp. He started walking toward me with a fake smile on the corner of his mouth. "You filming something, brother?" My heart started beating in my neck. I thought about saying it was just audio, some call, but my voice wouldn't come out. The 2 guys in front closed the space more, and the one who had been quiet behind me until then took 2 firm steps, surrounding me. One of them raised his hand like he was going to grab the phone. "Let me see this thing here." It was at that instant that my head shut off and my body acted on its own. I gave a shove to the closest one, turned and ran toward the cab. The truck door was still ajar. I jumped on the seat with half my body hanging out, turned the key, shifted with the wheel spinning in the air. The gate was light sheet metal, the kind that looks solid but can't take pressure. It burst the moment I threw it forward. I didn't look back, just drove straight, without blinking. I stayed like that for about 5 miles, weaving through streets, listening to the sound of my own engine like it was a siren. I only stopped when I saw the guardhouse of a police station. I drove in with the truck shaking. I was sweating even with the air conditioning on. My hand was shaking so much it took me a while to put it in park. I got out and handed over my phone with the recording. I explained everything. The officers listened carefully, took notes, thanked me. They asked me to file a report online later for protocol. I left there thinking I had done my part, that someone was going to shut that place down, investigate, arrest the guys. But 3 days later, out of curiosity or anger, I passed by that street again. The gate had been replaced, the name on the facade was different, and there were 2 more trucks parked being loaded quickly, like nothing had happened. I don't know if you've ever felt this, the feeling that you should do more, but that even if you do, nobody's going to lift a finger. That's how I felt after that day. I had the recording. I had escaped from a trap. I went to the police, and even so, 3 days later, the place was operating again with another name and other trucks. That's when I understood the size of the thing. I kept doing freight in the following weeks, but I changed my route. I avoided the LA area. I wouldn't even answer new calls from transport companies I didn't know. I got quieter too. At home, I didn't even tell my wife properly. I just said I'd had an ugly situation, but she noticed something had changed. And it had. Before I was suspicious, now I was paranoid. Everything became a warning sign. An open gate, a camera that doesn't rotate, a newly installed sign. And the worst part is nobody else talks about it. Drivers who disappear on fake freight are just another statistic. Some people think they left, some say they changed routes, but those who see it up close know there are routes that don't come back. 2 weeks after that, a colleague of mine, Eddie from Riverside, sent me a message saying he'd also been to a strange warehouse in San Bernardino. Similar description, new facade, employees without uniforms, and request for inspection before loading. He left there because, according to him, the gate closed by itself when he pulled up. He backed up everything, hit a pole, but escaped. Only he didn't record anything. And that's where a part comes in that still gives me tightness in my chest. I still had the video, and I didn't know whether to keep it or delete it, because as much as it protected me in that moment, it was also a threat, not against me, but against them. And people like that who deal with big things don't leave loose ends. I spent nights thinking whether it was better to delete it, but every time I was going to do it, I remembered the smell of that warehouse, the guy's expression when he saw the phone, the way they started surrounding me without raising their voices. And I thought that if I deleted it, it was like I was letting them win. So I transferred it to the computer and saved it on 2 different flash drives. One of them is with someone I know, a retired cop, good people who understands the world. I didn't tell him everything, just said that if something happened to open that file, maybe it's an exaggeration, but maybe it's not. The following month, I stopped driving. I had some savings put away, and I wanted to breathe, go home without looking in the rearview mirror, stop dreaming about that empty warehouse. But it was during this period that another thing disturbed me. I received a call from a blocked number. I answered on speaker. It was a calm man's voice, cold. He said, "We saw that you got out alive. Better leave it that way, understand, just that." One sentence and hung up. I sat there for a minute looking at the truck's dashboard. Engine off, quiet street, like time had stopped. I didn't tell anyone, not the police, not my wife. I just wrote it down on a paper, put it with the video documents and thought, now I know that they know. After that, I installed cameras in the truck, cameras at home, put in a tracker that only I can access. I even bought an extra chip and changed my main number. It's not just for me. I have a little daughter. And one thing I learned: whoever accidentally gets in the way of dangerous people can end up disappearing without a trace. And it doesn't matter if you have video, if you ran to the police, if everyone knows the address is strange. If they're big enough, nothing happens. There was one night I pulled up at a truck stop in Bakersfield to sleep. I was exhausted, and when I was getting out of the truck to go to the bathroom, there was a dark car parked right behind my trailer, closed windows, engine running. I didn't wait for anything. I went the other way, went into the bathroom, locked myself in the last stall, and stayed there for about 15 minutes. When I came back, the car was gone. Could have been a coincidence, might not have been, but those who live what I lived never think anything's normal again. Today, I only take freight from companies I know, that have structure, that don't invent new addresses from 1 hour to the next. And even so, the suspicion remains. What haunts me most isn't even what happened. It's knowing it could have happened to anyone else, someone younger, someone without the malice to be suspicious, and worse, someone who would have stayed. Because I don't know what they do with those who don't run. I only know what I did. And it was running with the door open, heart in my mouth, instinct on the steering wheel. Maybe that saved me, but it also silenced me. After that, I understood that there are stories you don't tell at bars, or at lunch tables, or even among truckers, because there are places that aren't companies, they're just fronts. And those who enter sometimes don't come out. If you go to a warehouse that seems normal, pay attention. Sometimes crime disguises itself better than the cargo. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.